Hello everyone and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jacob Hawthorne, and I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 14 years. I've pulled lost hikers out of ravines, tracked down confused hunters in blizzards, and found more dead bodies than I care to count. But what happened in September of 1976 still wakes me up in cold sweats. I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, crisp and clear like only late September can be. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the ridges in shades of gold and crimson. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when Sheriff Martinez walked in, his face grim as winter. "Got a missing family, Jake?" "Name's Brennan, Tom and Susan, 2 kids aged 8 and 10. They were camping up near Spruce Knob, supposed to be back Monday." I knew the area well. It was remote, 18 miles from the nearest road, but not particularly dangerous if you knew what you were doing. The Brennans had camping permits and seemed experienced enough on paper. "How long they been out there?" I asked, already reaching for my pack. 5 days total. Friend was supposed to meet them yesterday, found their car at the trailhead but no sign of them. I'd been through this routine dozens of times. Usually it ended with embarrassed campers who'd lost track of time, or someone with a twisted ankle waiting by their tent. The Appalachians could be unforgiving, but they weren't mysterious. Everything had a rational explanation. Bears, weather, human error. The drive to the trailhead took an hour on winding mountain roads. Martinez followed in his patrol car, both of us quiet. I'd known him for 8 years, and we'd worked plenty of searches together. He was solid, reliable, not the type to panic over nothing. The Brennan's blue Ford sat alone in the gravel parking area. I checked the license plate against my notes. It matched. No signs of struggle around the vehicle. Everything looked normal. "Keys are still in it," Martinez said, peering through the driver's window. We grabbed our gear and started up the trail. It was a moderate hike, well marked, leading into one of the deeper hollows near the mountain's base. The kind of place families chose for a quiet weekend away from civilization. After 2 miles, we smelled wood smoke. The campsite sat in a small clearing beside a creek. 2 blue tents were still standing, guy lines tight and stakes secure. A fire ring held cold ashes and half-burned logs. A pot sat on the metal grate, contents long since evaporated. "Tom? Susan?" I called out. My voice echoed off the surrounding ridges and died away. No answer. Martinez walked the perimeter while I examined the camp. Everything was neat, organized. Sleeping bags were still laid out inside the tents. Food was properly stored in bear canisters. No signs of panic or hasty departure. Then I noticed something odd. 4 sets of footprints, led away from the camp in different directions. Not together, like you'd expect from a family hiking. Separate paths, as if each person had wandered off alone. "That's strange," Martinez said when I pointed it out. "Why would they split up?" I followed the clearest trail. Heavy boots, probably the father. The prints led uphill toward a line of rocky outcrops, but after 50 yards, something made me stop and kneel down. The boot prints seemed to drag backward, as if the person had been walking in reverse. Toe marks pointed toward camp, but the impressions were deeper at the heel. I'd never seen tracks like that. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I'd been raised in these mountains, third generation. My grandfather used to tell stories about the Hollow Men, spirits of Civil War deserters who'd hidden in caves and died of shame and starvation. Local folklore, he'd always said with a wink, nothing but mountain superstition. But standing there in that empty clearing, with 4 sets of impossible footprints leading nowhere, I found myself remembering those old stories with uncomfortable clarity. The radio crackled on my belt. I tried to raise the station but got nothing but static. Not unusual in the deep hollows. The mountains played hell with radio signals. "Let's follow the tracks," I told Martinez. "Maybe they'll lead us to them." We chose the heaviest trail and started climbing. The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Birds should have been singing, squirrels chattering in the branches. Instead, everything was silent, dead silent. The boot prints led us up a steep slope covered in loose shale and mountain laurel. I'd tracked plenty of lost hikers before, but these prints bothered me. They were too deep, pressed into the earth like someone had been walking with enormous weight on their shoulders. Martinez kept checking his watch. "Getting late, Jake. We should call for backup." "Radio's still dead," I said, though I'd been trying every few minutes. The static was getting worse, if anything. Sometimes I thought I heard voices buried in the white noise, but when I listened closer, there was nothing. The trail curved around a massive boulder, and that's where we found him. Tom Brennan was buried up to his chest in soft earth, his arms clawing at the ground around him. His fingernails were torn and bloody. His eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered, rushing forward. I grabbed his arm. "Wait." Something was wrong. Tom's chest wasn't moving, no breath misting in the cold air, but his eyes tracked our movement, following us as we circled him. "Help me dig him out," Martinez said, dropping to his knees. The earth came away easily, too easily, like it had been recently turned. We pulled Tom free and he gasped, drawing a long, shuddering breath. His first in, who knows how, long. The ground," he wheezed. "It pulled me down. Susan, where's Susan?" I checked him over. No obvious injuries except the torn fingernails and dirt packed under his skin. But his body temperature was all wrong, too cold, like he'd been underground for hours. "How long were you buried, Tom?" "I don't." Time got strange. It was morning, then suddenly night. I heard voices calling from below, telling me to come down, come home. His eyes darted between Martinez and me. "You have to find them." They went down into the dark. Martinez helped Tom to his feet while I studied the area. The earth around the hole was loose, almost fluffy, but underneath I caught a glimpse of something that made no sense. Wooden beams, old and rotting. "There's something down there," I said. "Looks like an old mine shaft or root cellar." Tom grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Don't go down there. That's where the voices come from. They sound like people you love, people you've lost. They know things about you." A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air ran down my spine. I'd lost my wife Sarah to cancer 2 years ago. The grief still sat in my chest like a stone. We started back toward camp, Tom leaning heavily on Martinez. The sun was getting lower, painting the trees in shades of orange and red. I kept my eyes on the forest around us, but everything seemed normal, almost too normal. That's when we heard the crying. It came from up ahead, off the trail. A child's voice, high and frightened, one of the Brennan kids. "Katie?" Tom called out. "Katie, is that you?" The crying got louder, more desperate. We crashed through the underbrush following the sound, but every time we got close it seemed to move, always just out of reach. The trees began to thin, and we found ourselves in a small clearing I didn't recognize. Strange, considering I'd hiked this area for over a decade. In the center stood a single massive oak tree. Something was hanging from the lowest branch. Susan Brennan dangled about 8 feet off the ground, suspended by what looked like. I had to look twice to be sure. Rope made from twisted intestines, still glistening wet. Her feet kicked weakly at the air. "Oh God," Martinez said, raising his rifle. But I was staring at Susan's face. Her eyes were open, aware, looking right at us. Her mouth moved like she was trying to speak. "Get her down," Tom screamed, but I held him back. Susan had been dead for at least a day. I could tell by the color of her skin, the way her body hung. But she was still moving, still trying to talk. "Jake," Martinez whispered. "What the hell is going on here?" Before I could answer, the children's voices started up again. But now they were coming from directly beneath our feet. "Daddy, help us. We're down here." Tom fell to his knees, clawing at the ground. "They're under here. I can hear them." The earth beneath the oak tree was soft, recently disturbed. As Tom dug, I noticed something else. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees in the last few minutes. My breath was starting to show in the air. Martinez's radio crackled to life. Through the static, we heard a voice. "Jake, Jake, can you hear me?" I knew that voice. It was Sarah, my wife, the one who'd been dead for 2 years. "Sarah?" I whispered, taking the radio. "I'm down here, Jake. I'm waiting for you. I'm so cold." Tom was digging frantically now, throwing handfuls of dirt behind him. "I can feel the tunnel. There's a tunnel down here." The earth gave way, revealing a dark opening just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else. Something rotten. From deep in that hole, we heard the children calling, but now their voices sounded different, hungry. "Come down, Daddy. Come home with us." The radio crackled again. Sarah's voice, clearer now. "Jake, don't leave me alone. I've been waiting so long." I looked up at Susan hanging from the tree. Her lips moved, forming a single word over and over. "Run." That's when I saw them. Pale shapes moving between the trees at the edge of the clearing. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow, too tall and too thin. Their faces were holes where features should be. "Martinez," I said quietly, "we need to go. Now." But when I turned around, he was gone. Only Tom remained, half disappeared into the hole he'd dug, following his children's voices into the dark. I grabbed Tom's legs and pulled him back from the hole. He fought me, clawing at the edge. "Let me go. They need me. I can hear them crying." "Those aren't your kids," I said, though I wasn't sure how I knew. "Look at me, Tom. When did you last see Katie and Michael alive?" His eyes focused on mine for a moment. "Yesterday morning, we were making pancakes over the fire. Katie burned hers and started crying, and then..." He frowned. I can't remember what happened next. The pale shapes were getting closer, moving between the trees with unnatural stillness. No sound of footsteps, no rustling of leaves, just silent approach. "We have to find Martinez," I said, helping Tom to his feet. "Who's Martinez?" I stared at him. "The sheriff. He was just here with us." Tom's face was blank. "It's just been you and me, Jake, since you found me buried." A cold fist closed around my heart. I remembered Martinez helping Tom walk, remembered him raising his rifle when we saw Susan. But now, Jake. Sarah's voice drifted from my radio again. "Why did you leave me in that hospital? I was so scared." I switched the radio off with shaking hands, but her voice continued, fainter now, coming from the hole Tom had dug. "I called for you. I called and called, but you never came back." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. She was right. The last day, when the doctors said it would be hours, I'd gone home to shower and change clothes. I couldn't stand watching her fade away anymore. She died while I was gone, alone. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Tom was staring past me with wide eyes. "Jake, who is that?" I turned. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, wearing the blue hospital gown Sarah had died in. Her face was pale, her hair lank and unwashed. But it was her, exactly as I'd last seen her. "You left me," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the mountain air. "I waited for you." "You're not real," I said, but my voice cracked. "Feel how real I am." She stepped closer, and the temperature dropped even more. Frost was forming on the grass around her feet. "Feel how cold it is when you're dying alone." The pale shapes had emerged from the trees now. I could see them clearly. They had once been people, but something had changed them. Their skin was gray-white, their clothes rotted and dirt-stained. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken deep in their skulls. Civil War uniforms, I realized. Tattered and ancient, but unmistakable. "Deserters," Tom whispered. "My great-grandfather used to tell stories. Soldiers who ran from the battle at Rich Mountain and hid in these caves. They died of shame and starvation, but their spirits never left." The thing that looked like Sarah reached out to me. "Come home, Jake. Come where it's quiet and the guilt stops hurting." I backed away, pulling Tom with me. "What do they want?" "They feed on guilt," Tom said. His voice was clearer now, more focused. "They find people carrying shame and try to make them join. That's what happened to my family. Susan was always guilty about working too much, missing Katie's school plays. I felt bad about the drinking, the times I came home angry." One of the pale figures spoke, its voice like wind through dry leaves. "Come down into the dark. No more shame here. No more regret." The hole Tom had dug was getting bigger, expanding on its own. I could see wooden supports now, the frame of an old tunnel. More voices drifted up from below, children, adults, all calling for their loved ones to join them. "How do we fight them?" I asked. Tom shook his head. "You don't fight them. You accept them or you run. But they're fast underground, and they know these mountains better than anyone living." The Sarah thing was only a few feet away now. Up close, I could see she wasn't quite right. Her skin had a waxy quality, and her eyes were too dark, like looking into deep water. "I was so scared," she said. "The cancer hurt so much, and you weren't there when I needed you most." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I should have stayed." "Then stay now." She reached for my hand. Forever. The moment our skin touched, images flooded my mind. Sarah's last hours calling my name, nurses trying to comfort her, the funeral I'd barely attended because I was too drunk to stand, the months afterward when I'd lived on bourbon and guilt, but also other things. Sarah laughing on our wedding day. Her face when she told me she was pregnant, before the miscarriage that started the depression that made her vulnerable to the cancer. Good memories mixed with bad. "She loved you," Tom said quietly. "I can see it in her eyes even now. The real Sarah loved you." The thing wearing my wife's face snarled, showing teeth that were too sharp. "Love doesn't matter when you abandon someone." "I didn't abandon her," I said, and for the first time I meant it. I was scared and young and I made mistakes. but I loved her every day she was alive. The creature stepped back, its form flickering like a bad TV signal. Around us, the other pale shapes began to move closer, surrounding us. But now I could see them more clearly. They weren't monsters. They were people consumed by their own guilt and shame, trapped in an endless cycle of self-punishment. "The tunnel," Tom said. "It connects to all the caves in this area. That's where they take people. That's where they're keeping my family." A new sound echoed from the hole. Gunshots and a voice I recognized. "Jake, down here, I found them." Martinez. He was alive, somewhere in the tunnels below. "We have to go down," Tom said. "It's the only way." The Sarah thing had solidified again, blocking our path back to the trail. The other creatures formed a loose circle around us. The only way out was down, into the dark, where hungry voices waited. "Stay close," I told Tom, "and whatever you hear down there, whatever they show you, remember it's not real." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The tunnel was bigger than it looked from above, carved from living rock and shored up with rotting timber. Our flashlight beams revealed scratch marks on the walls, fingernails like people had tried to claw their way out. "Martinez," I called. My voice echoed strangely, seeming to stretch and change as it traveled deeper. "Down here," came the reply, fainter now. "Hurry." Tom stayed close behind me as we descended. The air grew colder with each step, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. But there were other sounds too, whispers, soft crying, and underneath it all, a rhythmic scratching like fingernails on wood. "This is wrong," Tom muttered. "These tunnels are too old, too deep. They've been here longer than the Civil War." The passage opened into a wider chamber. Our lights revealed a horrifying scene. Dozens of people sitting against the walls, all perfectly still. I recognized some faces from old missing person reports. Hikers, hunters, campers who'd vanished over the years. They were all alive, but wrong. Their skin had the same waxy pallor as the creatures above, their eyes dark and empty. When our lights hit them, they turned to look at us with identical expressions of hunger. "Welcome home," they said in unison, their voices creating a hollow harmony. At the far end of the chamber, I saw Martinez. He was kneeling beside two small figures, Katie and Michael Brennan. The children were moving, but like their mother, they were clearly dead. Their skin was gray, their clothes muddy from being buried. "Jake, thank God," Martinez said, standing up. "I found them, but something's wrong. They won't respond to me." I kept my light on him as we approached. "Martinez, how did you get down here?" "I followed the voices. Sarah told me you needed help." Ice ran through my veins. Martinez had been gone before I'd heard Sarah's voice on the radio. He couldn't have known about that. "What's my wife's name?" I asked quietly. The thing wearing Martinez's face smiled, and its teeth were black. "Does it matter, Jake? I'm here to help you join your family." Tom grabbed my arm. "It's not him. It's never been him. They can look like anyone." The fake Martinez laughed, and the sound echoed wrong in the chamber. "Smart man, but you're too late. Your friend's been down here for hours." In the corner, nearly hidden in shadow, I saw the real Martinez. He was sitting with his back against the wall, staring at nothing. A thin line of drool ran from the corner of his mouth. "What did you do to him?" I demanded. "Nothing permanent," the creature said. "We showed him his deepest shame. Did you know he killed a man in Vietnam? Friendly fire. Been carrying that guilt for 15 years. I looked closer at the sitting figures around the chamber. They weren't dead. They were lost, trapped in their own minds by the weight of their guilt and regret. That's what you do, I realized. You don't kill people. You make them prisoners of their own shame. The fake Martinez nodded. Much more satisfying than simple death. We feed on guilt, Jake, and you're a feast. The whispers in the chamber grew louder, and I realized they were all the same voice. My own, listing every mistake I'd ever made. Every harsh word to Sarah during her illness. Every time I'd chosen work over being with her. The night I'd left the hospital because I couldn't bear to watch her die. Listen to yourself, Jake, the creature said. Listen to what you really are. The guilt crashed over me like a wave. Every regret, every moment of selfishness, every failure as a husband. The voices grew louder, joining the chorus of my own self-hatred. Tom's hand on my shoulder brought me back. Jake, look at me. What's the worst thing you ever did? I left her alone, I whispered. She died alone because I was a coward. And why did you leave? The answer came harder than expected. Because I couldn't help her anymore. Because watching her suffer was killing me too. That's not selfishness, Tom said. That's being human. Around us, the creatures began to move closer. The fake Martinez grew taller, its face stretching unnaturally. Human weakness. Human failure. Come, home with us, Jake. No more pain here. But Tom was right. For the first time in 2 years, I could see past the guilt. Yes, I'd made mistakes. Yes, I'd failed Sarah in some ways. But I'd also loved her, cared for her, held her hand through chemotherapy and surgery and the long, dark months of dying. I'm not perfect, I said, and my voice was stronger. I never was, but I loved her as best I could. The creature that looked like Martinez snarled. Love means nothing when you abandon. I didn't abandon her, I interrupted. I was scared and human and imperfect, but I loved her every day of her life. The creature's form began to flicker, becoming transparent. Tom, I said, what's your guilt? I drank too much, came home angry, made Susan and the kids walk on eggshells around me. Are you a monster? No, he said slowly. I was hurting, and I handled it badly. But I loved them. The chamber began to shake. The sitting figures around the walls stirred, blinking as if waking from long dreams. The creatures' forms were becoming unstable, their solid shapes wavering like heat mirages. You can't accept ordinary human failure, I said, understanding flooding through me. You need perfect guilt, perfect shame. But most of us aren't monsters. We're just people who make mistakes. The fake Martinez let out a sound like wind through broken glass. You belong here, with us, in the dark. No, I said. I belong in the world, carrying my grief and guilt and love together. That's what being alive means. The creature lunged at me, but its hands passed through my body like cold smoke. Around the chamber, the other trapped people were standing, confusion clearing from their eyes. The children, Tom said urgently. What about Katie and Michael? The small figures by the far wall turned toward us. But I could see now that they weren't the Brennan children, just more of the creatures, wearing familiar faces. Where are they really? I demanded. The fake Martinez pointed toward a narrow passage at the back of the chamber. Down there, deep down, where the first ones wait, the original deserters. They have your living friends. How do we get them back? You don't, the creature said, its form growing fainter. They chose to come down. They chose to feed us their guilt. But I was already moving toward the passage, Tom and the freed prisoners behind me. We had to try. The deeper passage led to a natural cave, wider than anything humans had built. Ancient symbols covered the walls, not Civil War era, much older, Native American maybe, or something that preceded them. We found Katie and Michael Brennan sitting on the cave floor, very much alive but staring at the walls with blank expressions. Between them sat three figures in rotted Civil War uniforms, the original deserters, the ones who'd started this whole nightmare. They looked up as we entered, their faces gaunt but recognizably human. "Let them go," I said. The center figure, wearing the tattered remains of a sergeant's stripes, shook his head. They came willingly. The man felt guilt about his drinking. The children heard their dead mother calling. "Their mother isn't dead," Tom said. "She is now. We needed her to call them down." The truth hit me like a physical blow. The thing hanging from the tree hadn't been an illusion. It was really Susan, killed to provide bait for her family. Tom let out a roar of rage and grief and charged at the creatures, but his hands passed right through them, the same as the others. "You can't touch us," the sergeant said. "We're beyond physical harm, but we can touch the living when they're weighted down with guilt." I knelt beside Katie and Michael. They looked at me but didn't seem to see. "What did you show them?" "The girl believes she caused her parents to fight. The boy thinks his fear of the dark makes him a coward. Children's guilt burns brightest." "They're 8 and 10 years old," I said. "What kind of monsters are you?" "The kind that died slowly of shame," another deserter said. "We ran from battle, hid in these caves while our brothers died, starved rather than face what we'd done. And now you make others suffer for your cowardice?" The sergeant's eyes flashed. "We offer peace. No more shame, no more regret. Only the quiet dark." I looked at the children again. Katie's lips moved silently, and I could just make out the words, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." An idea began forming. "You feed on guilt," I said. "What happens if someone forgives themselves?" The creatures shifted uncomfortably. I turned to Tom. "Your daughter, Katie. What do you see when you look at her?" She's just a little girl. She never caused any fights. Susan and I had problems long before Katie was born." "Tell her that." Tom knelt beside his daughter. "Katie, honey, can you hear me? You didn't do anything wrong. Daddy's problems aren't your fault." Katie blinked, and for the first time since we'd found her, she really looked at him. "Daddy?" The deserters hissed in unison, their forms becoming less solid. "Michael," I said to the boy, "being afraid of the dark doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. Fear keeps you safe." The boy's eyes focused on mine. "But I cried when the lights went out." "So did I, when I was your age. So did your dad. That's okay." Michael nodded slowly, and I could see awareness returning to his face. The sergeant stood up, his form flickering between solid and transparent. "This changes nothing. We are eternal. More will come." "Maybe," I said, "but not these children." Tom gathered his kids in his arms, and together we started back toward the surface. The deserters watched us go, their hollow eyes burning with centuries of unresolved shame. We emerged from the tunnel into dawn light. The pale creatures from the night before were gone, retreated to whatever holes they hid in during daylight. The real Martinez was waiting by the cars, confused and shaken but alive. "What the hell happened down there?" he asked as we climbed out of the hole. "Gas leak," I said automatically. "Natural gas seepage from old mine works causes hallucinations." It was the explanation we'd give in our reports, the one that would satisfy bureaucrats and skeptics. The truth was something else entirely. We found Susan Brennan's body hanging from the oak tree, exactly as I'd seen her the night before. The medical examiner would rule it suicide brought on by gas-induced psychosis. The tunnels would be sealed as a safety hazard. But I knew better. 3 weeks later, another family went missing in the same area. Then a pair of hikers. Each time, the official explanation involved mine gas or natural hazards or simple accidents. I put in for a transfer to a different district. Couldn't explain why to my supervisor, just said I needed a change of scenery. But I keep track of the reports from that area, and the disappearances continue. The hollow men are still down there, still hungry. And there are plenty of people carrying guilt and shame willing to feed them. I've learned to live with my grief over Sarah, not to eliminate it, but to accept it as part of loving someone. The guilt will always be there, but so will the love. That balance keeps me human, keeps me safe. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I hear her voice on the radio static. Not the hungry, twisted thing from the caves, but the real Sarah, the one who loved me despite my flaws. "It's okay, Jake," she whispers. "You don't have to carry this alone." And I don't. That's the secret the hollow men will never understand. Guilt shared is guilt diminished. Love remembered is love that never dies. The mountains keep their secrets, but some of us learn to keep ours too. My name is William Ashford, and I've been a park ranger at Blackwater Falls for 21 years. In all that time, I've pulled 247 people out of these waters alive. Not one person has died on my watch. Not until that November day in 1982, when everything I thought I knew about this river turned out to be wrong. I was drinking my morning coffee when the call came in. 8 college kids from Marshall University had gone whitewater rafting yesterday morning. They should have been back by sunset. Their emergency beacon started transmitting from the bottom of the falls at 3 a.m. Probably partying too hard and lost track of time, Deputy Martinez said when he met me at the trailhead. "College kids, you know?" I knew better. The Blackwater River doesn't forgive mistakes. 60 feet of waterfall crashing into rocks sharp enough to cut steel. Water so cold it stops your heart in 5 minutes. Rapids that have names like Widowmaker and Bone Crusher. But 8 experienced rafters? Their group leader, Jake Morrison, had been guiding trips here for 3 years. He knew every rock, every eddy, every place where the current could grab you and not let go. The hike down to the bottom takes 40 minutes if you're careful. The trail switches back and forth down canyon walls that rise 200 feet on both sides. Pine trees grow sideways out of cracks in the rock. The sound of the falls gets louder with every step until it drowns out everything else. I've made this hike thousands of times. I know which roots will hold your weight and which rocks are loose. I know where to step and where the trail gets slippery from the mist. But that morning felt different. The forest was too quiet. Even the squirrels had gone silent. "You smell that?" Martinez asked when we were halfway down. I stopped and breathed deep. Under the pine scent and river smell was something else, something sweet and wrong, like flowers left too long in standing water. "Probably just algae bloom," I said. But I'd never smelled anything like it before. The mist from the falls started hitting us when we were still 50 yards away. November in West Virginia means the water's running high from autumn rains. The falls were twice their normal size, throwing spray 30 feet in every direction. That's when we found the raft. It was sitting upright on the rocks at the base of the falls, perfectly balanced, not flipped or torn like it should be after going over 60 feet of waterfall. The oars were still strapped in place. The safety gear was still packed in the dry bags, but no people. "How is that thing not smashed to pieces?" Martinez asked. Good question. I'd seen what the falls did to things. Logs got turned into splinters. Rocks the size of cars got moved downstream like pebbles. But this raft looked like someone had just pulled it up on a beach after a nice day trip. I checked the serial numbers. It was definitely their raft. Maybe they all made it to shore, Martinez said. I looked around the rocky shoreline. 8 sets of wet footprints should have been easy to spot, but the only marks in the sand were from my boots and his. The radio crackled. Base to Ranger Ashford. We've got the emergency beacon signal. It's coming from about 20 feet underwater, directly below the falls. Martinez and I looked at each other. 8 people don't just vanish, he said. No, I agreed. They don't. I started unpacking my diving gear. 21 years of river rescue had taught me that when people go into the Blackwater, you have about an hour to get them out alive. After that, the cold water and strong current usually take them somewhere you'll never find them. But as I suited up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the tree line. Every time I looked up, the shadows seemed to move, and that flower smell was getting stronger. The water was black as coffee and twice as cold. Even with a thick wetsuit, the chill hit me like a punch to the chest. The current at the base of the falls was brutal, trying to slam me against the rocks every few seconds. I dove down, following the beacon signal. 10 feet, 15, 20. The water got darker with every foot. My flashlight beam barely cut through the murk. That's when I found the first body. Jake Morrison was sitting on a boulder 22 feet down, perfectly upright like he was waiting for a bus. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the surface. No expression on his face. No fear, no pain. Just empty. But he wasn't alone. The other 7 were arranged in a perfect circle around Jake, all sitting on rocks, all staring upward with those same empty eyes, like they'd decided to have a meeting at the bottom of the river. I'd found plenty of drowning victims before. They always looked the same. Arms reaching up, faces twisted in panic, bodies bent from fighting the water. These kids looked peaceful, like they'd chosen to be there. I grabbed Jake first, the one closest to me. His body felt wrong. Too light, like his bones had turned hollow. When I lifted him, his mouth opened and a stream of black water poured out. But it didn't stop pouring, more water than any human body could hold. I shot to the surface, dragging Jake with me. Martinez was waiting at the shore with a body bag already open. 1 down, 7 to go, he said. Then he got a good look at Jake's face. Jesus Christ, Bill. What happened to his eyes? I looked down. Jake's eyes had gone completely white. Not just the pupils, everything. Like someone had painted them with milk. Water damage, I said. But I didn't believe it. I'd seen plenty of drowning victims. Their eyes didn't look like this. How long were they down there? Martinez asked. I checked my dive watch. About 18 hours based on when they went missing. 18 hours in 50-degree water should have. Martinez stopped, talking, and stared at Jake's body. Bill, he's not blue. He was right. Bodies that had been in cold water that long turned blue-purple from lack of oxygen. Jake's skin was pale but normal-colored, like he'd just been taking a nap. I dove back down for the others. Same thing each time, too light, eyes white, mouths full of endless black water. By the time I brought up the 4th body, Martinez had stopped helping. He just stood there staring at the growing line of corpses. This isn't right, he kept saying. This isn't right. When I dove for body number 5, a girl named Sarah with red hair, something went wrong with my equipment. My air gauge showed full, but I couldn't breathe. It felt like the regulator was feeding me water instead of air. I shot to the surface, ripping off my mask. "Equipment malfunction," I gasped. Martinez helped me to shore. "Maybe we should call this in. Get the state police dive team out here." "No," I said, checking my gear. Everything looked normal. 2 more to go. I'm not leaving them down there. But when I dove again, the last 2 bodies were gone. I searched the entire bottom, checked under every rock, behind every fallen log. The beacon signal was still transmitting, but there was nothing there. 7 college kids sitting in a circle, but the circle now had 2 empty spaces. "Where are the other 2? Martinez asked when I surfaced empty-handed. "I don't know. They were there 5 minutes ago." We spent 3 hours searching downstream. No bodies, no gear, no trace that 2 people had ever existed. The current wasn't strong enough to move them that far, that fast. Bodies don't just disappear in 20 feet of water. While we searched, I started hearing things. Singing. It was faint at first, mixed in with the sound of the waterfall, a low humming that rose and fell like a church hymn. I thought it was just the wind in the rocks, the way sound bounces around in the canyon. But then I heard words. Not English words. Something older, with clicking sounds and long vowels that seemed to echo from inside my head. The melody was sad and beautiful and wrong all at the same time. "You hear that music?" I asked Martinez. He stopped searching and listened. Just the falls. The singing got louder. Now it sounded like multiple voices all harmonizing in that strange language, coming from the direction of the waterfall. I walked closer to the base of the falls. The mist was heavier now, almost thick enough to swim through. And in the mist, I saw shapes. People standing in the water at the base of the falls, translucent, like looking through frosted glass. They were singing with their mouths open wide, but no sound was coming out. The music was coming from somewhere else. "Martinez," I called, "you need to see this." But when I turned around, he was gone. I was alone at the bottom of Blackwater Falls, with 7 bodies, 2 missing people, and ghosts singing in a language I didn't recognize. The logical part of my brain, the part trained in water rescue and emergency response, said I was suffering from nitrogen narcosis or hypothermia, hallucinations brought on by too much time underwater. The other part of my brain, the part that had grown up hearing stories about these mountains, knew better. My grandfather used to tell stories about the Blackwater, how the Cherokee used to say the river was haunted, how they would only cross it during certain times of the year and never alone, how sometimes people would go into the water and come out changed. But I'd never believed the stories. Spirits don't drown people. Poor decisions and bad weather drown people. The singing stopped. The mist cleared, and I saw that all 7 bodies had opened their eyes. They sat up in perfect unison, like someone had pulled their strings. Water poured out of their mouths, but their white eyes stayed focused on me. Then, one by one, they stood. I ran. 21 years of mountain training kicked in. I knew every inch of the trail up from the falls. I could make it to the top in 30 minutes if I pushed hard. Get to my truck, radio for backup, and figure out what the hell was happening down here. But the trail was wrong. The switchbacks that should have led up the canyon wall kept leading me back down toward the water. Paths I'd hiked thousands of times now ended at cliff faces or looped back on themselves. The forest had rearranged itself, and behind me, I could hear them walking, not running, not chasing, just walking steadily through the underbrush with wet feet slapping on stone. When I looked back, I caught glimpses of pale faces between the trees. Jake Morrison leading the group, his white eyes fixed on me. I tried my radio. Static. Tried my cell phone. No signal. The canyon walls should have let me reach the ranger station, but every frequency was dead. I found a cluster of boulders and climbed up, hoping to get a better view of the canyon rim. That's when I saw Martinez. He was standing at the edge of the river, perfectly still, staring down into the black water. As I watched, he took one step forward, then another, walking straight into the current. "Martinez!" I shouted. "Stop!" He didn't hear me, or didn't care. The water reached his knees, then his waist. He kept walking until the current caught him and pulled him under. I scrambled down from the rocks and dove in after him. The water was even colder than before, so cold it felt like being stabbed with ice picks. I could see Martinez sinking toward the bottom, arms at his sides, not fighting at all. I grabbed him around the chest and kicked for the surface. But something was wrong with the current. Instead of flowing downstream like it should, the water was pulling us back toward the base of the falls, fighting against physics, dragging us both toward the singing rocks. I managed to get Martinez to shore, but he wasn't breathing. I started CPR, pumping water out of his lungs. After 5 minutes, he coughed and opened his eyes. His completely white eyes. "The water is calling," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his. "It wants us to join the circle." Then he smiled with teeth stained black as river mud. I left him there and ran again. This time I didn't try to follow the trails. I went straight up the canyon wall, using climbing skills my father had taught me when I was 12. Hand over hand, finding holds in the rock face, pulling myself up toward the rim 200 feet above. Halfway up, I heard the singing again. But now it was coming from above me. I looked up and saw them standing at the edge of the canyon. 20 or 30 figures in old-fashioned clothes, looking down at me with faces that had been in the water too long. Men in work shirts and suspenders. Women in long dresses with their hair hanging in wet strings. Children with swollen bellies and blue lips. They were singing in that same clicking language, but now I could understand some of the words. Welcome songs. Come home songs. Join us songs. One of them, a woman in a white dress, pointed down at me and said something that made my blood turn to ice. "William Ashford, we've been waiting for you." She spoke in perfect English with my mother's voice. I lost my grip and fell 20 feet back down to the rocks. Landed hard on my left shoulder, heard something pop, but I got up and kept moving because those things at the rim were starting to climb down after me. That's when I found the cave. It was hidden behind a curtain of water from a side stream, just big enough for one person. I squeezed inside and discovered it went back about 30 feet into the mountain. Old Cherokee markings covered the walls, symbols I recognized from the cultural center displays. In the back of the cave was a pile of bones, human bones, arranged in careful stacks. Leg bones here, arm bones there, skulls lined up like a macabre library. Some of the bones were old, yellow with age. Others were fresh, still had bits of tissue clinging to them. And scratched into the cave wall above the bone pile was a message in English. The water demands payment for safe passage. Every generation, it chooses 8. The Cherokee paid this price for 200 years. When they were forced to leave, the debt passed to us. Feed the river, or it will take what it wants. Below that, in different handwriting, 1962, Boy Scout Troop 414. We thought we could outsmart it. Below that, 1976, Wilson Family Reunion. We were wrong. Below that, 1982, Marshall University Rafting Club. We're sorry. The last entry was dated yesterday, written in Jake Morrison's handwriting. They had known. Somehow they had known what was going to happen to them. And they'd come anyway. Outside the cave, I heard splashing. They had found me. I spent the night in that cave with the bones of people who had tried to escape this place. Every few hours, I heard voices outside calling my name. My ex-wife Linda asking me to come home. My sons begging for help. My mother singing the lullaby she used to sing when I was sick. But I knew they were all dead. Linda lived in Pittsburgh now. My boys were at college in Ohio. My mother had been in her grave for 6 years. The river was using their voices to call me out. As dawn light filtered into the cave, I studied the Cherokee symbols on the walls more carefully. I'd seen similar markings at the cultural center, but these were different. Older. They told a story in pictures. A great river running red with blood. People being forced to cross at spear point. Men, women, and children drowning in the cold water. And something else. Spirits rising from the water to drag the living down with them. The Cherokee Trail of Tears had come right through this canyon in 1838. Thousands of people forced from their homes marched west at gunpoint. When they reached the Blackwater River, it was running high from winter storms. The soldiers wouldn't let them wait for safer crossing conditions. Over 300 Cherokee drowned trying to cross here. Men who couldn't swim carrying children on their backs. Women weighted down by heavy skirts and winter coats. Elders who were already sick from the march. And according to the symbols, their spirits never left. Every 20 years, the river demanded 8 lives in payment for that mass drowning. 8 people to join the circle of the drowned, to sing the death songs, to call others into the water. If the debt wasn't paid voluntarily, the spirits would take what they needed. They would call people into the water with familiar voices. They would make the trails loop back on themselves. They would change the current to flow uphill if they had to. The Blackwater River was collecting interest on a debt written in blood. But there was something else in the cave markings. A way out. The Cherokee symbols showed a ritual. Tobacco offered to the water spirits. Prayers spoken in their language. Recognition of the wrong that had been done here. My grandfather had been half Cherokee. He'd taught me a few words when I was young, before my parents told him to stop filling my head with superstitions. I still remembered some of the prayers. I found a pack of cigarettes in my jacket, emergency tobacco for trade with local hunters who sometimes got lost. I crumbled the tobacco into my palm and crawled to the front of the cave. They were waiting for me. All of them. The 7 college kids standing waist-deep in the water. Martinez next to them with his white eyes and black smile. The drowned Cherokee in their old-fashioned clothes, forming a larger circle around the others. In the center of the circle, 2 empty spaces, waiting for me and one more. "Come home, William," Martinez called, with a voice like rushing water. "The river is lonely." I stepped out of the cave. The current immediately tried to grab my feet, pulling me toward the circle. But I held up my palm with the tobacco. "I offer this to the spirits of the water," I said in what little Cherokee I remembered. "I ask forgiveness for the wrong done to your people." The pulling stopped. The drowned Cherokee looked at each other, speaking in their clicking language. An old woman in a wet dress stepped forward. "You know the old words," she said in English, "but words without understanding are empty. Then help me understand." She gestured toward the circle of the drowned. "We hold them here as you held us, generation after generation, paying for others' choices. The debt grows larger with each collection. What do you want?" "Recognition, truth, the story told properly." Her white eyes fixed on mine, "and a promise that our crossing place will be respected." I thought about all the rafting companies that brought tourists through here. All the people who treated the river like their personal playground, never knowing what had happened in these waters. "I promise," I said. "I'll make sure people know." The old woman nodded. She spoke to the others in Cherokee, and one by one, they began to fade like morning mist. The 7 college kids collapsed back into the water, finally allowed to rest. Martinez fell to his knees on the shore, his eyes returning to normal. The singing stopped. The water started flowing downstream again. But before the Cherokee woman disappeared, she turned back to me. "The debt is not forgiven," she said, "only delayed. 8 lives every 20 years until the wrong is made right. 2002. Remember?" Then she was gone, and I was alone with 7 bodies and a traumatized deputy who didn't remember anything after walking into the water. We reported it as a flash flood. 7 college students swept over Blackwater Falls during an unexpected surge. 1 survivor found downstream with hypothermia and memory loss. Equipment failure led to delayed rescue. Tragic but not uncommon for Class 5 rapids during high water season. The families held a memorial service. The university started a scholarship fund. The local newspaper ran a safety reminder about whitewater dangers. Nobody asked why the bodies weren't damaged by going over 60 feet of waterfall. Nobody questioned why they all had the same peaceful expression and white eyes. Nobody wondered about the missing 2 who were never found. I started leaving tobacco at the base of the falls every month. Small offerings, respectful prayers in broken Cherokee. The old woman never appeared again, but sometimes I felt watched from the mist. Sometimes the water would warm slightly when I approached, like a nod of acknowledgement. I also started researching the history. Spent my free time at the state archives, reading military reports from the Cherokee removal. Found the officer's account of the crossing at Blackwater River. Regrettable losses due to winter conditions. Estimate 300+ casualties. Orders were to maintain schedule regardless of weather. 300 people. The official count always said 300. But in the Cherokee oral history, passed down through families who escaped the march, the number was different. 543 people drowned at Blackwater Falls. Men, women, children, and elders. If 8 lives were collected every 20 years, that was 40 lives per century. Over 2 centuries since the drowning, that was only 80 lives total. The debt was nowhere near paid. I started keeping track of the disappearances. 1962, Boy Scout troop, 8 members missing. 1976, family reunion, 8 cousins drowned. 1982, college rafting trip, 7 confirmed dead, 2 missing. 1987, fishing party, 8 men lost. 1992, church youth group, 8 teenagers presumed drowned. 1997, whitewater expedition, 8 guides and tourists. The pattern went back to 1842, 4 years after the Cherokee removal. Every 20 years, almost exactly on schedule. 8 people would go into the water and not come out the same. Sometimes their bodies were found arranged in circles. Sometimes they just disappeared. But always 8. Always at the Blackwater Falls crossing. The 20 years between each collection gave people time to forget. New rangers, new officials, new families moving to the area. The stories got filed away as accidents and tragedies. The pattern stayed hidden. But in 2002, I would be ready. I put in for early retirement in 2001. Trained my replacement, a young ranger named Sarah Collins from Colorado who had never heard the old stories about the river. I didn't tell her about the Cherokee woman's warning. I didn't explain why I kept leaving tobacco at the falls. I didn't mention that every few months I heard singing coming from the water on misty mornings. I figured if I wasn't here when the time came, maybe the debt collection would skip a cycle. Maybe the spirits would wait for the right person, the right circumstances. I was wrong. On November 15th, 2002, exactly 20 years after I'd pulled those 7 bodies out of the river, Sarah Collins called me at home. "Bill, I need your help. We've got 8 people missing at Blackwater Falls, hunting party from Morgantown. Their vehicles are still at the trailhead, but we can't find any sign of them near the water." "Did you check the bottom of the falls?" "That's the thing. The water's completely clear today. I can see all the way to the bottom. Nobody's down there." I drove back to the park that night, 20 years after I'd sworn never to return. The hunting party's trucks were still in the parking lot, but their owners were nowhere to be found. I hiked down to the base of the falls with my old diving gear and my last pack of tobacco. The water was singing again, and in the mist at the base of the waterfall, I could see them waiting. 8 new figures in hunting clothes, standing in a circle with their white eyes fixed on the surface. The Cherokee woman appeared beside them. "You promised the story would be told," she said, "but the crossings continue. People still treat our death place as a playground." "I tried," I said. "I left offerings. I researched the history. Not enough." She gestured toward the 8 hunters. "They came here drunk, shooting at anything that moved, desecrating the place where children drowned." I could see the choice in her white eyes. Join the circle myself, take my place as the keeper of the drowned, or find another way to honor the debt. I made my decision. I pulled out my cell phone and called the state police, the county sheriff, and 3 newspapers. "This is William Ashford, retired park ranger. I need to report multiple homicides at Blackwater Falls State Park. Suspects are the spirits of Cherokee people forced to cross here in 1838. Victims are 8 hunters who were taken into the water at exactly 3 a.m. this morning as payment for a blood debt that's been collecting interest for over 160 years. They thought I was crazy, right up until they found the 8 hunters sitting in a perfect circle at the bottom of the falls, all with white eyes and water pouring from their mouths that never stopped flowing. The story made national news. Now there's a memorial at the falls, a bronze plaque that tells the real history of the Cherokee crossing. Rangers give talks about respecting sacred sites. Tourist companies are required to provide historical context before bringing groups to the water. But every 20 years, like clockwork, 8 people still go into the river. Because some debts can't be paid with tobacco and good intentions. Some debts require blood. And the Blackwater River has a very long memory. My name is Marcus Flintridge, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I work at Hawks Nest State Park in West Virginia, where the mountains are old and the secrets run deep. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and pointing out scenic views, but my real job is darker than that. I specialize in industrial archaeology, documenting the mining disasters that carved scars into these hills. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in August, when the heat was so thick you could almost chew it. I was sitting in my office, updating files on abandoned mine shafts, when my radio crackled to life. "Marcus, we've got a problem at the old Hawks Nest tunnels," said Sarah from dispatch. Her voice had that tight edge that meant trouble. I set down my coffee mug, already knowing this wouldn't be good. The Hawks Nest tunnels had been sealed for 50 years for a reason. "What kind of problem?" "Urban explorers. 6 college kids broke into the sealed mine system yesterday. One of them called 911 around midnight, said his friends were trapped. Then the line went dead." My stomach dropped. Those tunnels weren't just dangerous. They were deadly. Back in the 1930s, Union Carbide dug a 3-mile tunnel through Hawk's Nest Mountain to divert the New River for a power plant. They hired mostly poor men, black and white, desperate for work during the Depression. What the company didn't tell them was that they were drilling through pure silica rock. 764 men died of silicosis from breathing that rock dust. Their lungs turned to stone while they were still alive. The company covered it up, paid off doctors, and buried the truth along with the bodies. It's considered one of the worst industrial disasters in American history. That's why I know these mountains so well. I've spent years documenting what happened here, interviewing families, collecting evidence that most people would rather forget. I've crawled through 43 abandoned mines and written reports on disasters that stretch back a century. I know the difference between a cave-in caused by bad engineering and one caused by something else entirely. Not that I believe in something else. Ghosts don't cause rockfalls. Spirits don't flood mine shafts. Dead men don't reach up from their graves to drag down the living. At least, that's what I told myself as I loaded my gear into the truck. The drive to the tunnel entrance took 20 minutes through winding mountain roads. Trees pressed close on both sides, their leaves already showing stress from the heat. When I pulled up to the old access point, I could see immediately that something was wrong. The concrete seal that had blocked the tunnel entrance for 50 years was broken open. Not cut or blasted. Broken from the inside, as if something had punched through 3 feet of reinforced concrete with its bare hands. Chunks of debris lay scattered in the weeds, some pieces thrown 30 feet from the opening. I grabbed my equipment, gas detector, high-powered flashlight, emergency oxygen, first aid kit, and my camera. The radio would be useless once I got deep into the tunnels. Cell phones didn't work down there either. If something went wrong, I'd be on my own. The tunnel mouth yawned black and empty. My gas detector immediately started beeping. Elevated silica dust in the air, which shouldn't have been possible in a sealed mine. I pulled on my respirator and clicked on my headlamp. "Marcus to dispatch," I radioed. "I'm going in. If you don't hear from me in 3 hours, call for backup." "Copy that. Be careful down there." I stepped into the darkness, and the mountains swallowed me whole. The tunnel was bigger than I expected, 12 feet high and 15 feet wide, carved through solid rock. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed by something I couldn't see. The beam of my flashlight seemed weaker than usual, barely penetrating the thick air. 50 yards in, I found the first sign of the missing explorers. A high-end hiking backpack, abandoned beside the tunnel wall. The fabric was covered in a fine layer of white dust that looked exactly like silica powder. But that was impossible. The tunnel had been sealed for decades. There shouldn't be any loose dust down here. I photographed the backpack and continued deeper. The temperature was dropping, which made no sense in August. Outside, it was 95 degrees. Down here, my breath was starting to fog. 100 yards further, I found something that made my blood run cold. Fresh boot prints in the tunnel floor, leading deeper into the mountain. But according to every map I'd ever seen, this tunnel should have ended in a concrete wall after half a mile. These prints were going somewhere that didn't exist. I followed the footprints deeper into the tunnel, my gas detector clicking steadily as the silica levels climbed. Every instinct I had developed in 13 years of mine safety work was screaming at me to turn around. But 6 people were missing, and I was the only one who knew these tunnels well enough to find them. The main tunnel branched off into smaller passages that weren't on any map I'd ever seen. Some were natural limestone caves, Others looked hand-carved. The boot prints split up here, with different sets going down different passages. I chose the largest tunnel and followed it deeper into the mountain. That's when I heard the first sound that didn't belong, the distant ring of metal on stone, like someone striking rock with a pickaxe. The sound echoed through the tunnels, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I stopped and listened, but it faded away into silence. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone down here? This is Park Ranger Marcus Flintridge. If you can hear me, follow the sound of my voice." Nothing. Just my own words, bouncing back from the darkness. I pressed on, following the boot prints through a series of chambers that opened up like cathedral spaces. My headlamp beams swept across carved walls that showed tool marks, but not from modern equipment. These looked like they'd been cut with hand tools, pickaxes, and chisels. In the largest chamber, I found the second backpack. This one was torn open, its contents scattered across the floor. Water bottles, energy bars, climbing gear, and something else that made my hands shake as I picked it up. A respirator mask, the kind that filters out dangerous particles. The mask had been shredded from the inside. The filter was clogged with white dust so thick it looked like concrete. Whoever had been wearing this mask had breathed in enough silica to kill them in minutes. I took photos and kept moving, but now I was moving faster. The sound of pickaxes was getting louder, more frequent. Sometimes I could swear I heard voices, men calling to each other in the distance. But when I stopped to listen, there was only silence. The tunnel branched again, and this time I saw light ahead. Not electric light, but the warm flicker of flames. I moved toward it carefully, my hand on the radio, even though I knew it wouldn't work down here. The light led to another chamber, this one smaller and more recently used. A campfire burned in the center, though there was no wood around it, just flames rising from bare stone. Around the fire, someone had arranged sleeping bags and camping gear, but no people. That's when I saw the third missing explorer. He was sitting against the far wall, still wearing his headlamp. From a distance, he looked like he was resting, but as I got closer, I could see that his eyes were open and staring at nothing. His face was gray, and when I checked for a pulse, his skin was cold. The man had died of silicosis. I'd seen the symptoms in my research: the gray skin, the foam around the mouth, the way the chest stops moving as the lungs fill with crystallized dust. But silicosis takes years to kill. This man had died in hours, maybe minutes. His lungs had turned to stone while he was still breathing. I was documenting the scene when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy boots on rock, moving with purpose. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Who's there?" I called out. The footsteps stopped, but now I could hear breathing, slow, labored, like someone struggling to get air through damaged lungs. The sound was coming from the tunnel I'd just emerged from. "I'm a park ranger," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you need help, I'm here to get you out." The breathing got louder, closer, but my flashlight beam showed only empty tunnel. The sound was moving toward me, but there was nothing there to see. That's when my gas detector started screaming. The silica levels were spiking beyond anything the machine could measure. The air was becoming thick with white dust that seemed to swirl and move on its own. I pulled my respirator mask tighter and back toward the far wall of the chamber. Through the swirling dust, shapes were forming, human shapes, but wrong somehow. They moved like men, but their outlines were fuzzy, made of dust and shadow. I could see through them to the tunnel wall behind, but they cast solid shadows in my flashlight beam. One of them stepped closer, and I could see details that made my throat close up with fear. It was a man in work clothes from the 1930s, overalls, heavy boots, a cloth cap pulled low over his face. But where his face should have been, there was only a hollow filled with swirling white dust. When he opened his mouth to speak, more dust poured out. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, its voice like grinding stone. "This place is for the dead." I tried to run, but more figures were emerging from the walls themselves, stepping out of solid rock like it was water. They surrounded me, their dust-filled eyes fixed on my face. My respirator was already starting to clog with the thick air they brought with them. "The others," I managed to say through my mask. "Where are the others?" The first figure tilted its head, and when it spoke, I could hear the rattle of stones in its throat. "They're with us now," it said, "just like you'll be." The dust was getting thicker, and my breathing was becoming labored. Even through the mask, I could taste silica on my tongue. My chest was starting to burn with each breath. But then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures stepped back into the walls and vanished. The dust settled, and the air cleared. My gas detector stopped screaming and dropped back to normal levels. I was alone in the chamber with the dead man and the impossible fire that burned without fuel. That's when I realized the truth that would change everything. These weren't just abandoned tunnels. They were tombs, and the dead men buried here weren't resting peacefully. They were angry, and they wanted justice for what had been done to them. I should have turned back right then. Any rational person would have. But I couldn't leave knowing that 5 more people were somewhere in these tunnels, probably facing the same fate as the man I'd found. So I pressed deeper into the mountain, following passages that seemed to extend far beyond what was physically possible. The tunnels were changing around me. Passages that had been straight were now curved. Walls that had been roughly hewn were now smooth as glass. And everywhere, the white dust was getting thicker, despite my equipment readings saying the air was clear. In the next chamber, I found 2 more bodies. A young woman and an older man, both college-aged explorers based on their clothing. They were huddled together against a wall, their arms wrapped around each other as if trying to protect themselves from something. Like the first victim, they had died of rapid silicosis. Their lungs had crystallized in minutes instead of years. But there was something else wrong with the scene. Both bodies were positioned facing a particular wall, as if they had been watching something before they died. I followed their gaze and saw scratches in the stone, letters carved deep into the rock with human fingernails. "They knew," it read, "the company knew we would die." Below that, in a different hand, 764 dead, no justice. And at the bottom, still fresh, written in what looked like blood, "Make them pay." I was photographing the wall when the pickaxe sound started again, but this time they were right behind me. I spun around and saw them clearly for the first time. Dozens of dust-shrouded figures, swinging phantom tools at the tunnel walls. They were miners, dressed in the work clothes of the 1930s, their faces hollow and filled with swirling silica dust. But they weren't attacking the walls randomly. They were expanding the tunnels, carving new passages that led deeper into the mountain, creating a maze that would trap anyone who entered. "We're building something," one of them said, without stopping his work. "A place where the truth can't be buried anymore." "What truth?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Another figure turned to look at me, dust pouring from its mouth like water. Union Carbide knew the rock was pure silica. They knew it would kill us. But they needed that tunnel built fast and cheap, so they sent us in without proper masks, without warning us what we were breathing. My historian training kicked in despite my fear. These men were talking about events I'd researched for years. The company said you were warned about the dust. They said proper equipment was provided. The figure that had spoken let out a sound like grinding stones, bitter laughter. They gave us bandanas, cloth rags to cover our mouths while we drilled through quartz that was 99% pure silica. They knew it would kill us in months instead of years. But why didn't you stop working? Because we were poor, another voice said from the shadows. Black men and white men, both desperate for wages during the Depression. They paid us 50 cents a day to die slowly, and when we started coughing up blood, they fired us and hired new men. The air was getting thick again, and my respirator was struggling to filter out the increasing dust. But I had to keep them talking. I had to understand what they wanted. The other explorers, I said. Are they alive? 2 more are still breathing, the first figure said. But not for long. They're deeper in the mountain now, in the chambers where we show visitors what really happened here. I need to find them. You can try, but you'll need to pass through the demonstration chambers first. You'll need to see what we saw, feel what we felt, breathe what we breathed. The pickaxe sounds were getting louder, more urgent. The dust figures were working faster, expanding the tunnel system at an impossible rate. Solid rock was flowing like water under their tools, creating new passages that stretched far beyond the original mine. Why are you doing this? I asked. Because the company covered it up, the figure said, turning back to its work. They paid off doctors to say we died of pneumonia. They buried our bodies without autopsies. They destroyed medical records and threatened our families into silence. But that was 90 years ago. Everyone responsible is dead. The pickaxe stopped mid-swing. Every dust-shrouded figure in the tunnel turned to look at me with their hollow, swirling eyes. The company still exists, they said in unison, their voices like an avalanche. The profits still flow. The truth is still buried. And new workers still die in new tunnels, breathing new kinds of poison. The chamber began to shake, and cracks appeared in the walls. Through the cracks I could see more tunnels, more chambers, stretching deeper into the mountain than any mine had ever reached. Find the others if you can, the first figure said. But know this, no one leaves these tunnels until justice is done. Until the truth is told. Until the dead are properly honored. The dust was becoming so thick I could barely see my own hands. My respirator was clogging faster than it should have been possible. I stumbled toward what I hoped was a tunnel exit, following the sound of voices in the distance. Behind me, I could hear the dust figures returning to their work, carving new chambers for new demonstrations. Building a monument to industrial murder that stretched deep into the heart of the mountain. And somewhere ahead, 2 more people were running out of time. The deepest chamber was vast, larger than any space that could exist inside a mountain. My flashlight beam disappeared into darkness overhead, and the walls curved away beyond sight. But it wasn't empty. The chamber was filled with machinery from the 1930s, drilling equipment, air compressors, rock crushers. All of it was running, even though there was no electricity down here. The machines moved with a rhythm like breathing, crushing phantom rock into phantom dust that swirled through the air in clouds thick enough to walk on. And working the machines were hundreds of dust figures, the 764 men who had died building the tunnel. They moved with the methodical precision of workers who had been at their jobs for 90 years, drilling and blasting and crushing in an endless cycle. In the center of the chamber, I found the last 2 missing explorers. They were alive, but barely. A young man and woman, probably graduate students, huddled together on a platform that rose above the worst of the dust. They were wearing respirators, but I could see that the filters were already gray and clogging. "Thank God," the woman said when she saw me. "We've been trapped here for hours. These things, they won't let us leave." "We tried to run," the man added, his voice muffled by the mask. "But every tunnel we took led back here. It's like the mountain is alive." I climbed up to their platform, checking my own equipment. My respirator was nearly clogged solid, and my emergency oxygen wouldn't last much longer. "How long have you been breathing this air?" "Since yesterday," the woman said, "but it's getting worse. I can feel it in my chest, like breathing ground glass." Below us, the dust figures had stopped their work and were looking up at our platform. One of them, wearing what might have been a foreman's hard hat, stepped forward and spoke. "You're witnessing the truth," he said. "What it was like to work in these tunnels. Every breath cutting your lungs like razors. Every day bringing you closer to drowning in your own crystallized blood." "We understand," I said. "It was terrible what happened to you. But these people didn't do it. They're just students." "Everyone who enters these tunnels must understand," the figure replied. "Must feel what we felt. Must choose between profit and human life, just like the company did." That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't random supernatural vengeance. It was a test, a lesson, a demand for justice that had been building for 90 years. "What do you want?" I asked. "Tell the truth," the figure said. "All of it. Not the sanitized version in history books, but the real story. The names of the men who died, the executives who knew and did nothing, the doctors who falsified death certificates." "I've been trying to do that for years," I said. "I've written reports, interviewed families, documented everything I could find. But you never published it. You never made it public." The figure was right. I had boxes of evidence sitting in my office. Testimonies, medical records, company memos that proved Union Carbide knew the tunnel would kill workers. But every time I tried to publish the research, lawyers would appear with threats and injunctions. The company was still powerful, still protected. "They'll sue me into bankruptcy," I said. "Destroy my career. Make sure the truth never comes out." "Then you understand our position," the figure said. "We died to build corporate profits, and when we died, they buried our story along with our bodies." The dust was getting thicker, and I could see the two students starting to struggle for breath. Their respirators were failing, just like mine. We had minutes before the silica levels would cause permanent lung damage. "If I promise to tell the story," I said, "will you let us go?" "Promises are easy," the figure replied. "Anyone can make promises. We need proof of commitment." The chamber began to shake, and more machinery roared to life. The dust clouds grew thicker, and I could taste silica through my failing respirator. My chest was burning with each breath, and I could feel the early stages of what the miners had experienced. "What kind of proof?" "Breathe our air," the figure said. "Feel what we felt. If you survive long enough to leave this mountain, then you'll have the strength to fight for justice." I understood then that this was the choice the miners had faced every day: breathe poison for money, or refuse and watch their families starve. There was no good option, only degrees of death. I pulled off my respirator. The first breath hit my lungs like acid. The air was so thick with silica dust that it felt like breathing wet concrete. I doubled over, coughing, tasting blood and ground glass. Each breath was agony, but I forced myself to keep breathing. Around me, the dust figures watched silently as I experienced what they had experienced every day for months. the slow suffocation, the feeling of lungs filling with stone, the knowledge that each breath was bringing death closer. But I didn't die. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the air began to clear. The machinery fell silent. The dust settled to reveal a chamber that was smaller, more normal, carved from ordinary rock. The dust figures were gone, but their voices echoed from the walls. Now you know. Now you understand. Tell our story. I helped the two students to their feet. Their respirators had held out longer than mine, but they were both showing early signs of silica exposure. We needed medical attention, and we needed it fast. As we stumbled toward the tunnel exit, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I would publish everything, every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence I had collected. I would fight the lawsuits and the threats and the attempts to silence me, because I had breathed the air of the dead, and I knew now what justice felt like. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom in Charleston, West Virginia, as a federal judge read the verdict in the wrongful death lawsuit filed by the families of the 764 Hawks Nest tunnel workers. My research had provided the evidence that broke the case wide open after 90 years of corporate cover-up. The students and I had made it out of the tunnels that day, though all three of us spent a week in the hospital being treated for acute silica exposure. The doctors were amazed we had survived. By their calculations, the dust concentrations we'd been exposed to should have killed us in minutes. I never told them about breathing unfiltered air in the deepest chamber. Some truths are too strange for medical reports, but I did tell the truth about everything else. My research, finally published despite threats and lawsuits, revealed the full scope of the Hawks Nest disaster. Union Carbide had known from the start that the tunnel would kill workers. Company memos, hidden for decades, showed executives calculating that it would be cheaper to pay death benefits than to provide proper safety equipment. The case made national news. Families received compensation for ancestors who had died penniless and forgotten. A memorial was erected at the tunnel site, listing all 764 names that had been buried along with the truth. The tunnels themselves were permanently sealed with concrete barriers 6 feet thick. The state declared the entire area a historical monument and restricted access to prevent future incidents. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear reports on the emergency radio. Voices from the sealed tunnels calling for help. The sound of machinery running where no machinery exists. Dust clouds that appear on clear days, swirling in patterns that look almost like human figures. I always respond to those calls, but I never find anything. The concrete seals remain intact. The tunnels are empty and silent. Yet I know the truth. Some injustices echo through the decades, creating their own kind of immortality. The miners of Hawks Nest got their justice, but their anger carved something permanent into that mountain. A reminder that corporate crimes have consequences that stretch far beyond the quarterly reports and executive bonuses that inspired them. Last week I received a call about another mining disaster, this one in Kentucky. A company cutting safety corners to increase profits. Workers dying of preventable lung disease. Families being told their loved ones died of natural causes. I'm driving down there tomorrow with boxes of research and a head full of hard-won knowledge about the price of buried truth. Because I learned something in those tunnels that no amount of ranger training could have taught me. The dead don't rest until justice is done, and sometimes the living have to breathe poison to understand what justice really means. The Hawks Nest tunnels are sealed now, but the story they contain is finally free. And in corporate boardrooms across the country, executives are learning that some secrets are too heavy to stay buried forever. The dust always finds a way to rise. My name is Jonathan Stormridge, and I've been a ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 20 years. In that time, I've pulled more than 300 people off these mountains, some alive, some not. I know every trail, every cliff face, every weather pattern that rolls through North Carolina's high country. At least, I thought I did. People always ask me about the name Stormridge. My daddy gave it to me, said it meant I was born to understand weather. Funny thing is, he was right. Spent 8 years in the Air Force as a meteorologist before coming home to these mountains. I can read pressure systems like other folks read newspapers. I know when a storm's coming 3 days out, just by the way the air feels against my skin. That March morning in 1973 started like any other. The weather station showed clear skies, but my bones said different. There's something about mountain air that most folks don't understand. It moves different up here, like it's got a mind of its own. The old Cherokee used to say these peaks were where the wind spirits lived. Of course, I never paid much attention to old stories. Wind doesn't think. It just follows pressure systems and temperature changes, same as it always has. I was checking instruments near the mile-high swinging bridge when the call came in. Television crew from Charlotte was missing. They'd come up to film a weather story about the 80-mile-per-hour winds we'd been having. Last anyone heard from them was during their live broadcast that morning. We lost contact around 9:30. Dispatch told me through the radio static. Last transmission showed some kind of equipment malfunction. Wind picked up real sudden-like. I'd seen plenty of city folks underestimate mountain weather. The bridge sits at 5,164 feet, completely exposed on Grandfather Mountain's granite peak. When the wind gets up here, there's nothing to stop it. It can knock a grown man flat or send him right over the edge if he's not careful. But a whole news crew? That was different. The first thing I noticed driving up was the van. Found it at the bottom of Rough Ridge, about a quarter mile from where they should have been filming. Thing was smashed flatter than roadkill, like something had picked it up and dropped it from a great height. But here's what didn't make sense. There were no skid marks on the road above. No sign it had gone over the guardrail. Just sitting there in the rocks like it had fallen out of the sky. The camera equipment was scattered across 3 different peaks. I'm talking about heavy gear, tripods, cameras, lighting rigs. Some of it was wedged into rock cracks 200 feet up cliff faces that would take a mountain climber hours to reach. The wind would have to blow harder than anything I'd ever recorded to move that stuff so far. My weather instruments were going crazy too. The barometer showed pressure readings that shouldn't exist at this altitude. The anemometer, that's the device that measures wind speed, was spinning so fast I thought it might break off its mount. But here's the thing that really got my attention. The air was dead still. Not a breath of wind anywhere. I called for helicopter support, but the pilot couldn't keep his bird steady. "It's like the air's fighting me," he radioed down. "I got downdrafts coming from all directions at once. This don't make any meteorological sense." That's when I found the cameraman. He was hung up on the weather vane at the peak's observation tower, 200 feet above where anyone could normally reach. Poor fellow was impaled right through the chest, arms and legs spread wide like he'd been flying. His face was frozen in terror, but his eyes were looking up at the sky like he'd seen something impossible. There was no way human wind could have carried a full-grown man that high and positioned him that precisely. Even hurricane-force gusts don't work that way. Wind is random, chaotic. It doesn't arrange people like decorations. Standing there looking up at that dead man, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years on these mountains. The hair on my arms stood straight up, and not from any electrical charge I could measure. The air itself felt wrong, thick and waiting, like the moment before lightning strikes. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, then growing stronger. Voices carried on a wind that wasn't there, speaking words I didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were telling me to leave, telling me this wasn't a place for people like me anymore. For the first time since I'd started working these peaks, I wondered if maybe the Cherokee had been right about something. Maybe there were things moving in the mountain air that couldn't be explained by pressure systems and temperature gradients. Maybe I was about to find out just how wrong I'd been about the wind. The search for the rest of the crew took me higher up Grandfather Mountain than I'd ever been before. There's a reason most folks stick to the tourist trails. The upper reaches are nothing but exposed granite and wind. Even in calm weather, it's dangerous. But the weather wasn't calm anymore. Every instrument I carried was telling me the same impossible story. Wind speeds jumping from 0 to 60 in seconds, then back to dead stillness. Temperature dropping 40 degrees in the span of a single step. My compass needle spinning like a child's top, unable to find magnetic north. I found the reporter first. Her name was Lisa Chen, according to her press badge. Young woman, maybe 25, with the kind of determined look that probably served her well in television news. She was sitting cross-legged on a ledge about 100 feet up the north face, completely unreachable by normal climbing. Her clothes weren't torn, no signs of injury. She was just sitting there staring out at the valley below, like she was waiting for something. "Miss Chen," I called up to her. "Can you hear me?" She turned her head down toward me, and I saw her mouth moving, but the words that reached my ears weren't coming from her direction. They were coming from all around me, carried on air currents that shouldn't exist. "He's coming for the rest of you," she said, though her lips were forming different words. "The one who walks between the clouds, the one your people drove away." The sound equipment operator was even higher up, somehow standing on the very tip of the mountain's radio tower. 150 feet of steel and guy wires, and this fellow was balanced on the top like it was solid ground. He was moving his arms in slow, precise patterns, like he was conducting an orchestra I couldn't see. "Get down from there," I shouted. "That tower can't support your weight." But he didn't fall. Didn't even wobble. The wind was holding him up. That's when I understood something was very wrong with the wind itself. I'd been a meteorologist for 28 years, 8 in the military and 20 on these mountains. I knew every way air could move, every pattern it could follow. But this was different. The wind wasn't following the laws of physics anymore. It was following something else entirely. I radioed for more help, but static was all that came back. The air was playing tricks with radio waves too, bending them in directions that made no sense. Every piece of electronic equipment I carried, radio, GPS, weather instruments, was either dead or giving readings that couldn't be real. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just heat distortion rising from the rocks. You know how air shimmers on a hot day, making everything look wavy and uncertain? But the temperature up here was barely 30 degrees. No reason for heat distortion. The shimmer took shape slowly, like someone drawing with invisible ink that was just starting to appear. Tall figure, probably 7 feet or more, moving through the air without touching the ground. His skin looked like it was made of cloud, gray and white and constantly shifting. His clothes moved in a wind that touched nothing else around him. And his eyes, Lord help me, his eyes were the color of storm clouds just before they let loose with lightning. He was looking right at me. I tried to run, but the wind had other ideas. It pushed against my back, then pulled at my chest, then came at me from both sides at once. My feet left the ground for just a second, long enough for me to understand what had happened to the news crew. This thing, whatever it was, could make people fly. "You bring the metal boxes that steal the sky's voice," it said, and the words came from everywhere at once. "You bring the lightning catchers and the wind measurers. You think you can own what has always been free." I managed to get my feet back on solid rock, but barely. The wind was playing with me like a cat with a mouse, letting me think I was in control before reminding me I wasn't. "I don't understand," I called out, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to the figure or to the wind itself. "What do you want?" "I want my mountain back," came the reply. "I want the metal gone. I want the measurers and the watchers and the sky thieves to go away and never return." The figure pointed toward where the news crew's equipment was scattered across the peaks. As he did, every piece of metal, cameras, tripods, cables, even the zippers on their jackets, began to glow with a cold blue light. "Your people came here with their thundersticks and their iron horses," the figure continued. "They drove my people into the ground and built their monuments to sky stealing on sacred places. Now you come with boxes that catch lightning and tools that measure wind like it belongs to you." That's when I realized what I was dealing with. This wasn't just some unknown weather phenomenon. This was something much older, much angrier, and much more powerful than anything in my meteorological training. This was one of the Cherokee wind spirits the old stories talked about. And he was done sharing his mountain with people who didn't understand what they were messing with. The reporter and the sound man were still up on their impossible perches, but I could see now they weren't in control of their own movements. The wind spirit was holding them there like a child holds toys, keeping them alive for reasons I didn't want to think about. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "let them go. They didn't know this was sacred ground." The spirit's laugh sounded like wind through pine trees during a thunderstorm. "Knowledge is not required for consequences," he said. "Your metal boxes have already disturbed what should not be disturbed. The damage spreads with every measurement, every signal, every attempt to predict what is meant to be wild." Lightning began to dance between his fingers, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The air pressure dropped so fast my ears popped, and I tasted copper on my tongue. The wind spirit was just getting started. What happened next taught me more about the true power of wind than 20 years of meteorological study ever could. The spirit raised both arms, and the air around Grandfather Mountain began to move like water in a bathtub when you pull the drain plug. Everything started rotating. Leaves, loose rocks, the scattered camera equipment, even the clouds overhead. But it wasn't chaotic like a regular tornado. This was controlled, precise, purposeful. He was creating a wind pattern that couldn't exist in nature. "You see how your instruments lie," the spirit said as my anemometer spun wildly before snapping clean off its mount. "They measure what the wind does, not what the wind is. They cannot capture the spirit that moves the air, only the air that the spirit has already left behind." I watched in horror as the reporter and sound operator began to move through the air like leaves caught in a dust devil, but they weren't being tossed around randomly. They were being carried with care, positioned exactly where the spirit wanted them. Lisa Chen floated past me close enough to touch, her eyes wide with terror, but her body perfectly safe in the supernatural wind's grip. "This is impossible," I breathed, and immediately regretted speaking. The spirit's attention turned fully to me. and suddenly I was 20 feet off the ground with nothing but wind holding me up. It felt like being caught in invisible hands, firm but not crushing, powerful but not violent. I could breathe, could move my arms and legs, but I couldn't control where I was going. Impossible? The spirit asked, carrying me higher up the mountain face. Your people have built entire cities believing they understand the sky. You have planes that think they own the air, buildings that think they can stand against the wind forever, instruments that think they can predict what the clouds will do tomorrow. We rose past the tree line, past the radio tower, past the peak itself. I was flying higher than anyone had ever flown without machinery, held up by nothing but the will of something that existed before my ancestors ever crossed the ocean. But you have forgotten the first truth, the spirit continued. The wind does not serve you. You serve the wind. And when you forget that, the wind reminds you. He showed me things no meteorologist was ever meant to see, the true shape of weather systems from the inside, where the eye of every storm is filled not with calm air, but with ancient spirits like himself. The way lightning chooses its path not through electrical conductivity, but through spiritual connection. The reason some mountains create their own weather, while others follow predictable patterns. Grandfather Mountain was alive, had always been alive. And everything we thought we knew about atmospheric science was just the outermost layer of something much deeper and more complex. Your television people came with their metal lightning catchers, the spirit explained as we moved through the air above the peaks. Every time they send their signals, every time they broadcast their pictures through the sky, they cut holes in the fabric that separates the spirit world from yours. You have been tearing the sky apart, one transmission at a time. Below us, I could see more of the news crew. The producer was standing on a ledge that couldn't possibly support his weight, arms spread wide like he was embracing the wind. The lighting technician was sitting cross-legged in midair, suspended above a 500-foot drop by nothing but moving air. They were all alive, but they were all trapped. "Why don't you just kill us?" I asked, immediately wondering if I really wanted to know the answer. "Because death is not punishment enough," the spirit replied. "You must understand what you have done before the understanding ends. You must see how your sky stealing has wounded the mountain itself." He carried me to a part of Grandfather Mountain I'd never seen before, a hidden valley that couldn't be reached by any trail. The rocks here were different, older, covered in symbols that looked like they'd been carved by wind rather than human hands. And everywhere, scattered among the ancient markings, were pieces of modern technology, fragments of weather balloons, broken radio antennas, pieces of satellite equipment that must have fallen from space, all of it glowing with that same cold blue light I'd seen before, like it was infected with something unnatural. "This is what your science does to sacred places," the spirit said. "Every measurement device, every radio signal, every attempt to control or predict the weather leaves a scar. The wounds pile up year after year, decade after decade, until the mountain itself begins to sicken." I could feel it now, a wrongness in the air that had nothing to do with temperature or pressure. The mountain was in pain, and that pain was spreading through every wind current, every weather pattern, every storm system that touched these peaks. The Cherokee knew better, the spirit continued. They worked with the wind, not against it. They asked permission before climbing high places. They understood that some knowledge was too dangerous for human minds to hold. He set me down on a narrow ledge, but I could feel the wind still holding me, ready to snatch me up again if I tried to run. "Now you will choose," the spirit said. "Help me cleanse this mountain of the metal sickness, or join your television friends in their permanent sky dance." Looking down at the reporter and the others, still floating in impossible positions around the peaks, I realized they weren't just trapped. They were being kept alive as a warning, a demonstration of what happened to people who brought sky-stealing technology to sacred places. But there was something else in the spirit's voice now. Desperation, loneliness, pain. This wasn't just about protecting sacred ground anymore. This was about survival. The Cherokee wind spirits were dying, poisoned by decades of electronic pollution, and this one was making a last stand on the only mountain peak still strong enough to support his kind. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. The spirit's expression shifted, and for just a moment, I saw not a terrifying force of nature but a wounded guardian fighting to protect the last place on earth that remembered the old ways. "Help me tear down the tower," he said. "Help me silence the metal voices forever. Help me make this peak clean again, so the mountain can heal." Lightning began to dance between his fingers again, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt like a tool being offered, a chance to help fix something that had been broken for far too long. I looked up at the radio tower, then at the floating news crew, then at the valley full of technological scars that no human eye had ever seen before. 20 years of mountain rescue experience told me to refuse, to find another way, to try reasoning with something that clearly couldn't be reasoned with. But 28 years of weather science told me the spirit was right. We had been poisoning the sky, one transmission at a time, and the bill was finally coming due. The question was, which voice was I going to listen to? The decision came easier than I expected. Maybe it was seeing the pain in the valley of broken technology, or maybe it was finally understanding that some things are more important than human convenience. Either way, I found myself saying words I never thought would leave my mouth. "Tell me what to do." The spirit's eyes brightened like lightning behind storm clouds. "You must touch the tower with your hands while I channel the mountain's lightning through it. The metal will melt, the signals will stop, and the healing can begin." I looked up at the radio tower, 150 feet of steel and electronics that provided communication for half the Blue Ridge Parkway. Destroying it would cut off emergency services, weather warnings, rescue coordination for thousands of square miles of mountain territory. It would also probably kill me. "The sound operator," the spirit explained, following my gaze upward. "He tried to climb the tower when the wind first took hold of him. His body serves as a conductor now, completing the circuit between earth and sky. When the lightning flows through the metal, it will flow through him as well." "You're asking me to murder someone." "I am asking you to help heal a dying mountain," the spirit replied. The television man chose to climb toward the sky-stealing metal. He made himself part of the machine that wounds the earth. His fate was sealed by his own actions. The wind picked me up again, carrying me toward the base of the radio tower. Up close, I could see what the spirit meant. The sound operator wasn't just standing on top of the tower. He was somehow fused with it. His hands gripped the metal antenna array, but his fingers had begun to change, becoming metallic themselves, growing into the equipment like roots into soil. "The longer the metal stays in contact with sacred ground, the more it spreads," the spirit said. "First it corrupts the air, then it corrupts the earth, then it corrupts the flesh of those who serve it. Your friend up there has become part of the machine." I could see other changes too. The man's skin had taken on a metallic sheen. His eyes glowed with the same cold blue light as the scattered equipment. When he opened his mouth, static came out instead of words. He wasn't human anymore. Maybe hadn't been human since the moment he'd touched that tower. "If I do this," I said, "what happens to the others? The reporter, the producer?" They return to Earth, the spirit promised. They go back to their metal boxes and electronic lives, but they remember. They tell others what happens to sky thieves who come to sacred places without permission. Lightning was building in the spirit's hands now, crackling between his fingers like captured starlight. The air pressure was dropping so fast my ears ached, and every metal object on the mountain began to hum with electrical charge. "The storm comes," the spirit said, "with or without your help. But if you help guide the lightning true, it will burn clean and quick. If you do not, it will spread wild and consume everything metal for 50 miles in all directions. Your choice, Sky Reader, your choice." I thought about my daughter Sarah, safe in her college dorm room 300 miles away. I thought about the hundreds of tourists who visited Grandfather Mountain every year, never knowing they were walking on sacred ground. I thought about all the ranger stations and communication towers and weather monitoring equipment scattered across the Blue Ridge, keeping people safe from mountain storms. And I thought about the Cherokee families who had been driven from these peaks a century and a half ago, leaving behind only their stories about wind spirits and sacred high places that white settlers would never understand. The spirit was right. We had been stealing the sky, one electronic device at a time, until we'd forgotten that the air itself had its own rights, its own spirit, its own ancient claim to these mountain peaks. "All right," I said. "I'll help you." The moment my hands touched the tower's metal base, every nerve in my body caught fire. Lightning flowed down from the spirit's fingers, through the tower structure, through the corrupted sound operator still fused to the antenna array, and into the bedrock of Grandfather Mountain itself. I felt the mountain's pain as my own. A century and a half of metal driven into sacred ground. Radio waves cutting through spirit pathways. Electronic signals disrupting the natural flow of wind and weather that had existed here for thousands of years. But I also felt the mountain's relief as the tower began to melt. The sound operator's screams turned to static, then to silence, as the lightning burned away both metal and flesh, leaving nothing but clean air and scorched rock. Every piece of electronic equipment on the mountain sparked and died. My radio, my GPS, the weather monitoring station, even the digital watch on my wrist, all of it fried in the space of a single heartbeat. The spirit released his hold on the other news crew members, and they fell gently to the ground, unconscious but alive. The reporter landed near me, her eyes rolling back to normal, her breath coming in deep, natural gasps. She would live. They all would. But they would remember. The tower collapsed with a sound like thunder, crushing the observation deck and sending sparks flying in all directions. But the sparks weren't destructive. They were healing, burning away the technological scars that had accumulated on the mountain over decades of human interference. As the last of the metal cooled and settled, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The wind moving the way it was meant to move. Clean and wild and free, following patterns that had nothing to do with pressure systems or temperature gradients and everything to do with the living spirit of the mountain itself. The Cherokee wind spirit began to fade as the sun touched the western horizon, becoming transparent like heat distortion again. "The mountain remembers now," he said, his voice carried on a breeze that felt like benediction. "The sky knows its own again. But the healing is only beginning. You must make sure the metal sickness does not return." "How?" I asked. "You know the old ways now," the spirit replied. "You have felt the mountain's true nature. Share that knowledge. Teach others to read the real signs in wind and weather. Help them understand that some places are too sacred for machines." He was almost gone now, just a shimmer in the evening air, but his final words carried clearly on the wind. And remember, Sky Reader, the storm spirits are always watching. The official report blamed everything on a freak tornado, atmospheric disturbance of unknown origin, radio tower destroyed by lightning strike, television news crew found unconscious with no memory of events. One casualty, sound operator apparently struck by lightning while attempting to climb radio tower during severe weather event. Nobody questioned my version of events. After all, I was the meteorological expert. I'd been reading mountain weather for 20 years. If I said it was a tornado, it must have been a tornado. The truth stayed between me and the mountain. The news crew recovered completely, though none of them could remember anything after setting up their equipment that morning. Lisa Chen went back to Charlotte and never covered another weather story. The producer requested transfer to sports. The lighting technician quit television entirely and became a park ranger in Florida, as far from mountains as he could get. They remembered something, even if they couldn't put it into words. The state decided not to rebuild the radio tower. Too expensive, they said. Too much of a lightning risk. Instead, they moved emergency communications to a facility 30 miles south, well away from Grandfather Mountain's peak. I didn't fight the decision. 6 months later, I met with elders from the Cherokee Nation, told them about unusual weather patterns on Grandfather Mountain, about the need for traditional ecological knowledge to supplement modern meteorology, suggested that maybe some places were better left to the old ways of understanding weather and wind. They listened politely, but I could see in their eyes that they already knew, had always known. We're just waiting for someone with white skin to figure it out. Now I work with them, consulting on sacred site preservation, teaching tourists about traditional Cherokee weather lore, helping people understand that the mountains are more than just scenic overlooks and radio tower foundations. My weather predictions are more accurate than they've ever been. Not because I've gotten better instruments. In fact, I use fewer electronic devices than ever before. But because I've learned to listen to the wind itself, to feel the mountain's moods, to read the real signs that no barometer can measure. Sometimes, on clear days when the air is perfectly still, I climb back up to where the radio tower used to stand. There's nothing there now but ancient rock and the faint traces of Cherokee symbols carved by wind rather than human hands. And sometimes, if I listen very carefully, I can hear voices carried on breezes that touch nothing else around them. Wind spirits that were here long before my people crossed the ocean, and will be here long after we've learned to respect the sky again. They're watching, always watching, waiting to see if we've really learned the lesson or if they'll need to teach it again. The mountain remembers now. The question is, will we? Last week, a technology company approached the Park Service about installing weather monitoring equipment on Grandfather Mountain. High-tech stuff, Doppler radar, atmospheric sensors, satellite communication arrays. They said it would help predict severe weather, save lives, advance the science of meteorology. I recommended they find another location. Some places are too sacred for machines. Some knowledge is too dangerous for human minds to hold. And some winds are meant to blow free, without measurement, without prediction, without the electronic interference that turns living sky into dead data. The Cherokee wind spirits taught me that. And if people don't listen to the lesson the first time, well, the mountain has all the time in the world to teach it again. The wind is patient, but it's not infinitely forgiving. And it's always watching. My name is Benjamin Coalfire, and I've been a park ranger in the Coal River Valley for 17 years. People think that's a strange name for someone who protects the environment, but my family's been digging coal out of these mountains for 3 generations. I guess you could say I switched sides. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, when ice hung from every tree branch like broken glass. My coffee was still steaming when the radio crackled to life. "Ben, we got a problem up near the old Whitesville mines," said Sheriff Morris. His voice sounded tight. "Those environmental folks from the city went missing 3 days ago." I knew the ones he meant. 5 activists had come down from Charleston to document the damage from mountaintop removal. They'd been taking pictures of the stripped hills and the orange water that leaked from old mine shafts. The mining company didn't like that much. "Last known location?" I asked, already reaching for my gear. "GPS shows they were near the old Deep Creek mine before their signals went dead. That's the one that got sealed up after the accident in '89. I remembered that mine. 27 men died when a pocket of methane gas exploded. The company sealed it with concrete and steel, said it was too dangerous to recover the bodies. My own grandfather had worked those tunnels before the gas pocket formed. The drive to Deep Creek took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. Ice made everything slippery, and I had to use 4-wheel drive the whole way. The landscape looked like something had taken a giant bite out of the mountain. Where there used to be thick forest, now there were just flat, gray platforms of bare rock and poisoned soil. I parked next to the environmental group's van, still sitting where they'd left it. Inside, I found their equipment scattered around: cameras, water testing kits, and notebooks filled with measurements. One notebook was still open to a page that made my blood run cold. Water sample, 47, Deep Creek mine entrance. pH level 2.1, battery acid level. Orange-red coloration suggests heavy iron contamination. Note: entrance appears to have been recently disturbed. Concrete seal has new crack patterns. I looked up at the mine entrance, maybe 50 yards away. Sure enough, the concrete barrier that had sealed the tunnel for 30 years showed fresh damage. Someone had blasted it open from the inside. That was impossible. There was no other way in or out of that mine. I checked my air monitor as I approached the entrance. The needle jumped immediately into the danger zone. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, all the gases that could kill you before you even knew they were there. But there were other smells, too. Something rotten, like meat, left out in summer heat. The opening was just big enough for a person to crawl through. Fresh mud around the entrance showed footprints going in, but none coming out. 5 sets of boot prints from the missing activists. But there was something else. Marks in the mud that looked almost like handprints, but wrong somehow. Too long. Too many knuckles. I called Sheriff Morris on the radio. "I'm at Deep Creek mine. The seal's been breached. I can see where the missing people went in, but I'm reading deadly gas levels. Can you go in after them?" I looked at the black hole in the mountain and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I can try, but I need backup and proper breathing equipment. This isn't just a rescue anymore, Morris. Something's very wrong here." "What do you mean?" I stared at those strange handprints in the mud. They were everywhere once I started looking, like someone had been crawling on all fours. But they were too big to be human hands. I mean, this mine was sealed from the outside 30 years ago. Nobody could have opened it from the inside unless... I stopped, because the rest of that thought didn't make sense. Unless someone had been down there all along. I waited 2 hours for backup to arrive. Deputy Sarah Chen brought the emergency breathing gear from the county fire department, along with portable gas detectors and enough rope to reach China. She was good people, smart, careful, and not afraid of dark places. "You sure about this, Ben?" she asked, checking her oxygen tank. "That mine's been closed since before I was born." 5 people are missing, I said. "Maybe 6 if you count whoever opened that hole." We roped up and entered the mine together. The tunnel sloped down into the mountain at a steep angle, and our headlamps only reached about 20 feet ahead. The air was thick and wet, like breathing through a wet towel. The first thing we found was one of the activists' cameras, smashed against the tunnel wall. The memory card was still intact, so I pocketed it. Then we found pieces of torn clothing and dark stains on the coal walls that could have been blood. "Ben," Sarah whispered, "look at this." She was shining her light on the tunnel wall, where someone had scratched words into the coal with a sharp object. "Help us." And below that, "They're still here." "Recent?" I asked. "Looks like it. Coal dust is still fresh on the ground." We followed the main tunnel deeper into the mountain. According to the old mining maps, this shaft went down 800 feet before hitting the main coal seam. But what we found didn't match any map I'd ever seen. The tunnel split into dozens of smaller passages, like the veins in a leaf. Some were so small you'd have to crawl. Others opened up into chambers big enough to park a truck, and all of them showed signs of recent digging. "This is wrong," I told Sarah. "These side tunnels aren't on any of the original mine plans." That's when we heard the sound. A scraping noise, like someone dragging something heavy across stone. It came from somewhere deeper in the mine, echoing off the tunnel walls until we couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. We followed the main tunnel for another 100 yards before finding the first body. It was Marcus Webb, one of the environmental activists. He was still wearing his bright red jacket, but that's about all I recognized. Something had torn him apart. I won't go into details about what we found, because some things shouldn't be described. But I will say that it looked like whatever killed Marcus had been feeding, and feeding for a while. Sarah threw up. I almost did too, but I forced myself to examine the scene. The wounds weren't from any animal I knew. The claw marks were too regular, almost like they'd been made by human fingernails. But no human fingernails could tear through muscle and bone like that. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, wiping her mouth. "Right now." I was about to agree when we heard something that made us both freeze. Voices. Human voices, coming from somewhere deeper in the mine. "Help. Please help us." It was weak and echoing, but definitely human. At least 2 different people, maybe 3. "The other activists," I said. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Ben, this could be a trap. Whatever killed Marcus could still be down there. They're alive. We can't just leave them." The voices came again, closer this time. "Please. We're hurt. Can't get out." I made the decision that probably saved our lives, even though it felt like cowardice at the time. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the entrance. "We go back for help," I said. "Full rescue team, better equipment, more people." We ran through those tunnels faster than was safe, stumbling over broken timber and loose rock. Behind us, the voices followed, but they were changing, getting deeper, more desperate, and they weren't asking for help anymore. They were calling our names. "Benjamin, Sarah, don't leave us." I'd never told anyone down there my name. We burst out of the mine into the gray February daylight like we were drowning people breaking the surface. I immediately called for a full emergency response. State police, mine rescue team, hazmat specialists, the works. But as we waited for help to arrive, I couldn't stop thinking about those voices. How did they know our names? And why did they sound so hungry? The state mine rescue team arrived just before sunset, along with enough equipment to drill to the center of the earth. Captain Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who'd pulled more miners out of collapsed tunnels than anyone else in West Virginia. "What's the situation?" he asked, studying the mine entrance. I told him about the missing activists, the body we'd found, and the voices calling for help. I didn't mention how they'd known our names. That part sounded crazy even to me. Gas levels? Deadly. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, plus something else I couldn't identify. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We'll use positive pressure breathing gear and go in teams of 3. Nobody separates. Nobody goes deeper than 500 feet without checking in." His team was good. Professional. They'd seen everything there was to see in mines. But they hadn't seen this. The first team made it 200 feet before their radio went dead. Standard procedure was to wait 15 minutes, then send in a backup team. We waited 30 minutes. No contact. The second team found the first team's equipment scattered throughout the tunnel, including their breathing gear and radios. But no bodies. And the equipment showed no signs of damage or struggle. It was like 3 grown men had just vanished into thin air. "I don't like this," Rodriguez said. "Something's not right down there." That's when we heard the explosion, deep underground, like thunder rolling through the mountain. The ground shook under our feet, and a cloud of dust and gas shot out of the mine entrance. "Cave in," someone yelled. Rodriguez was already on his radio, calling for heavy excavation equipment. But I knew it wasn't a cave-in. The sound was wrong. It was too controlled, too deliberate. Someone had set off explosives down there. We waited until morning to try again, this time with full mining equipment and a drilling rig. The plan was to drill a parallel shaft and come at the problem from a different angle. But when the first drill samples came up, they contained something that made everyone step back. Bones. Human bones, but wrong somehow. Too thin in some places, too thick in others. Like they'd been stretched and compressed at the same time. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes from the State Medical Examiner's office took one look at them and called for backup from the CDC. She also asked for a private word with me. "Ben, I've been examining bones for 15 years, she said. "These don't match anything in human anatomy. The density is wrong, the structure is wrong, even the chemical composition is wrong." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying these used to be human bones, but something changed them, something that shouldn't be possible." That night, I went home and researched everything I could find about the Deep Creek mine. What I discovered made me wish I'd never gotten involved. The mine had been owned by Blackstone Energy Corporation, the same company that had been accused of illegal chemical dumping throughout the 1980s. They'd faced dozens of lawsuits from families claiming that toxic exposure had caused birth defects, cancer, and other health problems. But there were other accusations too. Whisper campaigns about secret experiments, about using the miners as test subjects for industrial chemicals. Nothing was ever proven, but too many people had complained for it to be completely false. I also found records of the 1989 accident that killed 27 miners. But the more I read, the more convinced I became that it hadn't been an accident. The explosion had happened in a section of the mine where no mining was taking place, and according to safety logs, the gas levels had been normal that day. Someone had deliberately triggered that explosion. But why? I was still reading when my phone rang. Sarah's voice was tight with fear. "Ben, you need to get down to the mine, now." "What's wrong?" "The night security guard is missing, but his car is still here and his radio is still broadcasting." "Broadcasting what?" "You need to hear it yourself." I drove back to Deep Creek through the dark mountain roads, my headlights cutting through fog that seemed thicker than it should be. At the mine site, I could hear the radio crackling from 50 yards away. The voice coming through the static was the missing security guard, Jim Morrison. But he sounded different, deeper, strained. "This is Unit 7, requesting immediate assistance. I'm trapped in the lower tunnels. Something is down here with me." Rodriguez tried to respond. "Jim, this is Captain Rodriguez. What's your location?" They're not what they used to be. Oh God, they were miners once. But the chemicals, the experiments." The radio went silent for a long moment. Then Jim's voice came back, but it was wrong somehow. Too calm. "Never mind. False alarm. Everything is fine down here. You can all go home now." Rodriguez and I looked at each other. That wasn't Jim Morrison anymore. "We need to seal this mine permanently," I said. "Whatever's down there, we can't let it get out." But Rodriguez was looking past me, toward the mine entrance. "Ben," he said quietly, "look." In the darkness beyond our lights, shapes were moving. Human-shaped, but wrong. They moved like they were crawling, but they were standing upright. And their eyes reflected our lights like animal eyes in the dark. They were coming out of the mine. The creatures that emerged from the Deep Creek mine had once been human. You could still see traces of their former selves: a wedding ring on a twisted hand, a company hard hat grown into a skull, work boots that had fused with feet that no longer looked like feet. But 30 years of exposure to Blackstone's chemical experiments had changed them into something else. Their skin was black as coal dust. Their limbs stretched and bent at impossible angles. Their fingers had grown into claws that could tear through rock. And they were hungry. Rodriguez's team opened fire immediately, but the bullets barely slowed them down. The creatures moved faster than anything human-sized should be able to move, scrambling over rocks and equipment like spiders. "The trucks!" I yelled. "Everyone to the trucks!" But the creatures had already surrounded us. There were dozens of them, maybe more. Some crawled along the ground. Others climbed the sides of buildings like they were walking on flat ground. In the chaos, I lost track of Rodriguez and most of his team. Sarah grabbed my arm. "The equipment shed. It's reinforced steel." We ran for the small building where the mining equipment was stored, slamming the metal door just as something heavy crashed against it from outside. The building shook with each impact, but the steel held. "What are those things?" Sarah gasped. "Miners," I said. "From the 1989 accident. They never died. Blackstone was conducting experiments down there, exposing workers to experimental chemicals. When the explosion happened, it wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to trap them underground with their test subjects." Through a small window, I could see the creatures searching the area methodically. They moved with intelligence, checking every vehicle, every hiding spot. They weren't just animals hunting for food. They were thinking. One of them approached our window. In the harsh glare of the emergency lights, I could see its face clearly for the first time. Beneath the coal-black skin and the twisted features, I recognized him. "Tommy Kowalski," I whispered. Tommy had been my father's friend, one of the miners who died in the '89 explosion. Except he hadn't died. He'd been transformed into this thing, trapped underground for 30 years, slowly losing his humanity. As if he'd heard his name, Tommy's head turned toward our window. His eyes had changed color, turning the orange of acid mine drainage. But for just a moment, I thought I saw recognition there. He raised one clawed hand and pressed it against the glass. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear but could read on his lips. "Help. Us." That's when I understood. The creatures weren't just hunting us. They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something. I opened the window, just a crack. Tommy Kowalski. The thing that had been Tommy nodded slowly. When it spoke, its voice was like gravel sliding down a metal chute. Blackstone. Still there. Still experimenting. Where, Tommy? Deep levels, company records. They need fresh subjects. Behind Tommy, the other creatures had stopped hunting. They were all looking at me now, waiting. They're planning to do it again, I said to Sarah. The experiments. That's why they wanted the environmental activists. Fresh test subjects. Tommy pressed harder against the window. Stop them. Burn the records. Before they spread. Spread? Other mines. Other mountains. The chemicals. They're still producing them. I finally understood the full scope of what Blackstone Energy had been doing. Deep Creek wasn't the only experimental site. They had operations throughout Appalachia, using isolated mining communities as testing grounds for chemical weapons or biological experiments. And they were still at it. Where are the records, Tommy? Bottom level, the old executive offices, but they have guards. Human guards. I looked at Sarah. We have to go back into the mine. Are you insane? If Tommy's right, Blackstone is still conducting experiments, still transforming people into these things. We have to expose them before they can spread to other locations. Tommy was nodding frantically. Around him, the other creatures began to make sounds. Not quite human speech, but something that might have been agreement. They help us? Sarah asked. I looked into Tommy's orange eyes and saw something I hadn't expected to see. Hope. Yes, I said. They'll help us, because they want this to end as much as we do. We left the equipment shed together, 2 humans and 30 former miners who had become something else entirely. They led us back into the Deep Creek mine, moving through tunnels they knew better than the surface world. The deeper we went, the more evidence we found of Blackstone's ongoing operations. Fresh equipment, recent excavation, and worse, holding cells that had contained human subjects until very recently. At the bottom level, we found what we were looking for. A hidden complex of offices and laboratories, still powered by an underground generator. The walls were lined with filing cabinets containing 30 years of experimental records, and sitting at a desk in the main office, very much alive and very human, was Dr. Marcus Webb, the same name as one of the missing environmental activists. Mr. Coalfire, he said calmly, I've been expecting you. Dr. Webb wasn't surprised to see us. He wasn't even surprised to see the creatures that had once been miners. He simply pushed his glasses up his nose and gestured to the files scattered across his desk. 30 years of research, he said. 30 years of perfecting the transformation process. Do you have any idea how valuable that data is to the right buyers? You're still experimenting on people, I said, improving them. The subjects we've created are stronger, more resilient, capable of surviving in environments that would kill normal humans. Imagine the applications. Deep space exploration, underwater construction, toxic waste cleanup. I looked at Tommy, who stood beside me with his clawed hands clenched into fists. You call this improvement? The early trials had some rough edges, Webb admitted, but we've refined the process considerably. The newest subjects retain full human intelligence while gaining enhanced physical capabilities. The missing activists are helping us advance the research. Voluntarily, of course, once they understood the potential benefits. Sarah stepped forward, her hand on her service weapon. You're under arrest for kidnapping, murder, and human experimentation. Webb smiled. I don't think so, Deputy. You see, you're trespassing on private property. This mine complex belongs to Blackstone Energy and has been in continuous operation under special federal contract since 1989. Everything we've done here has been completely legal. He pressed a button on his desk, and the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. 6 men in black tactical gear entered the office, weapons drawn. Federal contractors, Webb explained, authorized to use lethal force to protect classified research. That's when Tommy spoke up. His gravelly voice filled the office like an underground earthquake. No more. The other creatures moved faster than the guards could react. 30 years of living in darkness had made them incredibly efficient predators. The fight was over in seconds. Webb tried to run, but Tommy caught him at the doorway. For a moment, I thought the creature was going to tear the doctor apart like he'd done to so many others. Instead, Tommy lifted Webb off the ground and looked into his eyes. "You did this to us," Tommy said. "You turned us into monsters. But we're still human enough to want justice instead of revenge." He set Webb down carefully and pointed toward the filing cabinets. "Burn them all," Tommy said. I gathered every file, every computer drive, every piece of research data in that underground complex. Sarah found industrial chemicals that would burn hot enough to destroy everything. As the flames spread through the office complex, I heard the sound of explosions from deeper in the mine. The creatures were collapsing the tunnels, sealing the experimental chambers forever. We made it to the surface just as the entire Deep Creek mine system collapsed. The mountain shook for 5 minutes, and when it was over, there was nothing left but a pile of rubble where the entrance used to be. Tommy and the other creatures stood with us, watching their underground home disappear. In the morning light, they looked more human somehow. Still changed, still transformed by decades of chemical exposure, but recognizably the men they had once been. "What happens now?" I asked Tommy. He looked at the rising sun with eyes that had forgotten what daylight looked like. "We find the other sites," he said, "the other mines where Blackstone is still experimenting. We stop them before they can create more like us. And then?" Tommy smiled, and for just a moment he looked like the man my father had known 30 years ago. "Then we rest." Dr. Webb survived, though the federal contractors didn't. He was arrested by the FBI and charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and violation of human experimentation laws. The investigation that followed exposed Blackstone Energy's illegal operations in 17 states and led to the largest environmental cleanup in Appalachian history. But sometimes late at night when I'm patrolling the mountains, I hear sounds from the deep places underground. Voices that might be human or might be something else. And I wonder how many other Tommy Kowalskis are still down there, waiting for someone to help them find their way home. The coal companies say they've cleaned up their act. They promise that the bad old days of illegal dumping and human experimentation are over. But I've learned something important about promises from coal companies. They're worth about as much as the poisoned water that still leaks from their abandoned mines. And sometimes, when that orange water runs a little thicker than usual, I know Tommy and his people are still out there, still hunting, still making sure that the monsters who created them never get the chance to create more. Some people ask me why I stayed in Coal River Valley after everything that happened. Why I didn't transfer to somewhere safer. Somewhere where the ground doesn't hide secrets that could swallow you whole. The answer is simple. These mountains need someone to watch over them. Someone who knows that the real monsters aren't the creatures living in abandoned mines. The real monsters are the ones who wear business suits and create quarterly profit reports by destroying everything they touch. And as long as those monsters exist, Coal River Valley needs someone like me to make sure they don't go too deep underground ever again. My name is Samuel Ironside, and I've been a ranger with Pisgah National Forest for 16 years. In all that time, working the highest peaks in North Carolina, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. 3 avalanche rescues, countless lost hikers, and more than one body recovery from folks who didn't respect what 6,000 feet of elevation can do to you in winter. I was wrong about seeing everything. It was December 15, 1979, when the call came in about the missing weather crew. 3 scientists from the National Weather Service had been up at the Mount Mitchell Summit Station for routine maintenance. That was 5 days ago. No radio contact since day 2, when their last transmission mentioned something about trees moving wrong. I loaded my gear into the ranger truck that morning. Rope, medical kit, emergency rations, and the portable radio that kept crackling with static. My wife Sarah kissed me goodbye at the door, told me to be careful up there. Our twin girls, Emma and Lucy, barely looked up from their cereal. At 8 years old, they were used to Daddy heading into the mountains when people got in trouble. The drive up to Mount Mitchell takes you through some of the most beautiful country on earth when it's not trying to kill you. That day, with fresh snow falling and the temperature dropping below 0, it looked like the surface of another planet. The Fraser fir trees that covered the upper slopes had been dying for years, something called the balsam woolly adelgid, tiny bugs that killed whole forests. What remained were silver skeletons reaching toward a gray sky. Mount Mitchell stands 6,684 feet above sea level, highest peak east of the Mississippi River. The Cherokee called it Atakula, which meant where the spirits gather. I knew that from my research into local history, part of my job as a ranger. What I didn't know then was how right they were. The weather station sat on a rocky outcrop near the summit, a small building that housed instruments measuring wind speed, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. It was designed to withstand 100-mile-per-hour winds and temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. When I reached it that morning, everything looked normal from the outside. Inside was a different story. The 3 scientists' gear was still there, coffee cups half full and frozen solid, notebooks filled with weather data, personal items scattered on bunks. But no sign of Dr. Hayes, Dr. Martinez, or Dr. Chen. The monitoring equipment was still running, recording data that made no sense. According to the thermograph, there had been a localized temperature spike of 40 degrees the previous night, lasting exactly 13 minutes. In December, at 6,000 feet, during a blizzard. That was impossible. I radioed base camp, reported the empty station. My supervisor, Tom Crawford, told me to search the immediate area and wait for backup. Standard protocol for missing persons in winter conditions. What wasn't standard was what I found when I stepped outside. The Fraser fir trees around the station had been arranged differently. I'd been to this site dozens of times over the years, knew every dead tree and rocky outcrop. But sometime during the night, the skeletal remains of the firs had been moved into geometric patterns, perfect circles and straight lines that looked almost like symbols when viewed from the station's observation deck. Dead trees don't move themselves, not even in 100-mile-per-hour winds. I spent the rest of that first day searching in expanding circles from the station, looking for any sign of the missing scientists. The snow was deep and the wind kept picking up, but I found scattered gear about a quarter-mile down the mountain, a torn jacket, a broken flashlight, and something that made my stomach turn. Bone fragments, lots of them. Too many to be from normal wildlife deaths. and they were scattered among the roots of the dead firs like someone had been digging. Some of the bones looked old, stained brown by soil and time. Others looked fresh. That night, I stayed in the weather station and tried to raise the missing team on every frequency. All I got was static, except for one moment around midnight when I could swear I heard voices speaking in what sounded like Cherokee. But that was impossible too. There were no Cherokee communities within 50 miles, and the language was mostly lost anyway. I was trained as a meteorologist in the Marines before becoming a ranger. I knew how to read weather data, and what I was seeing on the station's instruments didn't make sense. The wind patterns were all wrong, creating pockets of dead calm in the middle of a blizzard. The temperature readings showed hot spots moving around the mountain like living things, and the barometric pressure kept spiking in regular intervals like a heartbeat. Something was very wrong on Mount Mitchell. But I'd been through war, survived 3 avalanches, and pulled more than 20 people off these mountains in conditions that should have killed all of us. I figured I could handle whatever was out there. That was my second mistake. The first was thinking dead trees couldn't walk. The second day started with a sound I'd never heard before, a low humming that seemed to come from the trees themselves. I woke before dawn in my sleeping bag on the weather station floor, and at first I thought it might be wind through the dead branches. But wind doesn't hold a steady note for 20 minutes straight. I stepped outside into air so cold it burned my lungs. The humming got louder, and I could feel it in my chest like standing too close to a large speaker. The dead Fraser firs around the station were covered in fresh snow, but underneath the white coating I could see something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The bark was moving, not swaying in the wind, actually moving, rippling like water under the snow. And the geometric patterns from the day before had changed. The circles had become spirals, and the straight lines now pointed toward something deeper in the forest. I followed the tree line markers with my compass and found the first scientist. Dr. Hayes was sitting at the base of a massive dead fir, legs crossed, arms folded, looking for all the world like he was meditating. Except his eyes were gone, and his bones were picked completely clean. But the bones hadn't been scattered by animals. They were still perfectly arranged in human form, held together by something I couldn't see. His clothes were intact. Even his wedding ring was still on his finger. I'd seen exposure deaths before and animal predation, but nothing like this. It was like something had carefully removed every bit of flesh while leaving everything else untouched. The bones were white as fresh snow and warm to the touch despite the freezing air. When I reached for my radio to report the find, Dr. Hayes's head turned toward me. I dropped the radio and fell backward into the snow. The skull's empty sockets tracked my movement for several seconds before going still again. I lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, waiting for my heart to stop hammering. Dead men don't turn their heads. Dead men with no muscles, no tendons, no nothing holding their bones together definitely don't turn their heads. I forced myself to approach again, moving slowly and keeping my breathing steady like I'd learned in the Marines. This time, Dr. Hayes didn't move. But when I knelt down to examine the body, I could hear the humming sound coming from inside the tree behind him. The dead fir was singing. My radio crackled to life. Not with Tom's voice from base camp, but with Dr. Hayes speaking clearly. The trees remember everything, Sam. They remember who was buried here. I grabbed the radio. Hayes, where are you? Are you injured? Static. Then another voice I recognized as Dr. Martinez. We tried to leave, but the roots go too deep. The Cherokee knew better. I keyed the mic again. Martinez, where's your location? I found Hayes at Grid Reference. Grid references don't work here anymore, Dr. Chen's voice interrupted. The mountain exists outside normal space now. The spirits made sure of that. The voices faded back into static, leaving me alone with a skeleton that had somehow operated a radio. I backed away from Dr. Hayes's remains and noticed something else that chilled me worse than the December air. The scattered bone fragments I'd found the day before had moved overnight. They were now arranged in patterns around the bases of the dead trees, forming what looked like small graves. And there were more bones than before. A lot more. Like the mountain was giving up secrets it had kept buried for decades. I spent the rest of the morning following the trail deeper into the dead forest. The geometric tree patterns led me to an area where the firs had been clear-cut years before, leaving only stumps and exposed soil. But in the center of the clearing was something that made me understand why the Cherokee had called this place sacred. Ancient burial mounds, dozens of them, arranged in the same spiral pattern as the dead trees. Most had been disturbed, excavated by someone who hadn't cared about proper burial customs. Bones and artifacts were scattered everywhere. Arrowheads, pottery shards, and human remains that had been exposed to the elements. Logging company, I realized. They'd clear-cut right through a Cherokee burial ground without even filing an environmental impact report. The spirits Dr. Chen mentioned weren't metaphorical. That afternoon I found Dr. Martinez. She was 20 feet up in a dead Fraser fir, but not hanging from a rope or caught on branches. She was somehow integrated into the tree itself, her body partially merged with the trunk like the bark had grown around her. Her eyes were still open, still aware, and when she saw me, she tried to speak. "Sam." Her voice was barely a whisper, coming from the tree itself rather than her mouth. "Don't let them cover this up. The logging company. They knew what they were destroying. Martinez, how long have you been here? I'm going to get you down." "No." The tree shuddered, and I could see her hands move slightly within the bark. "This is punishment. We came here with machines, just like the loggers. The spirits don't distinguish between chainsaws and weather instruments." The humming grew louder, and I could see movement in my peripheral vision. The other dead trees were starting to sway without any wind, their skeletal branches reaching toward each other like they were trying to communicate. "The Fraser firs aren't really dead," Martinez continued. "They're just waiting. The Adelgid killed the living wood, but the spirits can animate what remains. They've been protecting this burial ground for generations." I looked around at the silver forest of dead trees, understanding finally why the Cherokee had considered this mountain sacred. These weren't just trees anymore. They were guardians, and they were waking up. By the third day, I realized I wasn't dealing with a rescue mission anymore. I was trapped inside something that defied every law of nature I'd learned in meteorology school and 16 years of mountain experience. The weather station's instruments were recording impossible data. Wind speeds of 0 in the middle of a blizzard, with temperature readings that showed the dead forest was actually generating heat. My GPS unit kept showing my location as coordinates do not exist, and my compass spun freely without finding magnetic north. The mountain had somehow removed itself from normal space and time. I tried to hike down to the parking area that morning, following the trail I'd climbed hundreds of times before. After 3 hours of walking, I found myself back at the weather station. I tried again, taking a different route. Same result. The dead Fraser firs had formed barriers across every path, their skeletal forms creating an impassable maze that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at it. The humming from the trees was constant now, and I was starting to understand it wasn't random sound. It was communication. The trees were talking to each other, coordinating their movements like a single organism with thousands of parts. That's when I found Dr. Chen. He wasn't dead like Hayes or trapped like Martinez. He was standing in the middle of the cleared burial ground, perfectly healthy and holding a notebook, writing frantically. "Chen," I called out, relief flooding through me. "Jesus, I thought you were dead." He looked up and his eyes were completely black. Not pupil-dilated black, but solid black like looking into deep water at night. "Not dead," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that sounded like wind through branches. "Enlightened. The spirits showed me the truth about this place." He held up his notebook, and I could see the pages were covered with symbols that matched the patterns the dead trees had been forming. Cherokee writing mixed with what looked like mathematical formulas. "They've been trying to tell us for decades," Chen continued. "Every time humans disturb the burial grounds, more of the mountain awakens. The logging in the 1960s triggered the first wave. Our weather instruments triggered the second. Chen, we need to get off this mountain. The Forest Service is sending a rescue team." He laughed, a sound that carried the same humming frequency as the trees. "No rescue team can reach us now. The spirits have pulled this section of Mount Mitchell outside normal reality. Time moves differently here. Space folds in on itself. We exist in the same moment as the Cherokee ancestors who were buried in these mounds." As if to prove his point, I could see figures moving between the dead trees. Translucent forms in traditional Cherokee dress, watching us with eyes that held centuries of anger. They weren't ghosts exactly. They were memories given form by the awakened forest. "The Fraser firs were the perfect vessels," Chen explained, his black eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. "The Adelgid killed them slowly, hollowing out the living wood but leaving the structure intact. The spirits filled that hollow space with their own essence. Now every dead tree on this mountain is part of their consciousness." I backed away from Chen, finally understanding that whatever had happened to him was worse than death. The spirits hadn't just trapped him, they'd converted him into something else. The trees around the burial ground began to move with purpose. Not swaying or bending, but actually walking, their root systems pulling free from the frozen soil with sounds like breaking bones. They formed a circle around me, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers. "The Cherokee buried their dead with specific rituals," Chen continued, seemingly unaware of my growing terror. "Orientations that connected the spirits to the living world through the root networks of sacred trees. When the logging company destroyed those connections, they severed the link between the dead and the earth. The spirits have been trying to restore that connection ever since." The walking trees were close enough now that I could see the details of their transformation. The bark wasn't just moving, it was reshaping itself into forms that resembled human faces, all twisted in expressions of rage and loss. Bone fragments had been incorporated into the wood, creating patterns that looked like skeletal hands reaching out from inside the trunks. "They want to add us to their number," Chen said. "Living humans who can serve as bridges between their world and ours." Martinez volunteered. "Hayes fought them, so they took just his bones. I cooperated fully. What do they want from me?" Chen's black eyes focused on me with an intelligence that was no longer entirely human. "You're a ranger. You have authority over this land. They want you to help them restore the burial sites and prevent future desecration." The circle of animated trees tightened around me. I could feel their attention like weight pressing against my mind. Thousands of years of accumulated anger and grief focused on the man who represented the government that had allowed their sacred places to be destroyed. And if I refuse? Chen smiled, showing teeth that had somehow become pointed. Then you'll join Hayes as an eternal guardian, conscious but unable to interfere, watching over the burial grounds until the end of time. The trees began to hum again, and this time I could understand what they were saying. Not words exactly, but meaning that bypassed language and spoke directly to my mind. They showed me the history of Mount Mitchell, generations of Cherokee who had lived and died here, sacred ceremonies that connected the living to the ancestor spirits, and the sudden violence of industrial logging that had shattered those connections like broken glass. They showed me the Fraser firs in their living state, majestic trees that had stood for centuries as guardians of the burial grounds. They showed me the adelgid infestation, the slow death of the forest, and the moment when desperate spirits had filled the hollow wood with their own essence to continue their protective work. And they showed me the future they wanted, a restored burial ground where the dead could rest in peace, protected by an army of sentinel trees that no human would dare disturb again. The only question was whether I would help them willingly or become another skeleton sitting guard over their sacred places. The trees stopped humming and waited for my answer. I had perhaps 30 seconds before the walking trees reached me, their bone-studded bark faces twisted in expressions of ancient fury. Chen stood motionless in the center of the burial ground, his black eyes reflecting starlight that couldn't penetrate the heavy clouds overhead. The Cherokee ancestor spirits moved between the dead firs like smoke, their translucent forms growing more solid with each passing moment. "Wait," I called out, raising my hands. "I need to understand something first." The trees paused, branches swaying despite the complete absence of wind. "You're protecting burial grounds that were disturbed by the logging company," I continued, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But that happened 20 years ago. Why are you acting now?" Chen tilted his head, considering the question. "Time isn't linear here anymore. Past and present exist simultaneously, but the immediate trigger was our weather monitoring equipment." "Weather equipment?" "We drove metal stakes into the ground to anchor our instruments," Chen explained. "Those stakes penetrated the burial mounds. The spirits interpreted it as another attempt at grave robbing." I thought about the standard procedure for setting up temporary weather stations. Metal rods driven deep into the earth for stability, just like Chen described. We'd unknowingly desecrated sacred graves with our meteorological instruments. So this is punishment for something we didn't know we were doing. The Cherokee spirits began to solidify further, and I could see details of their faces now. Not the peaceful expressions of natural death, but the anguish of people whose final rest had been violently disturbed. Some bore the wounds of disease. Others showed the effects of forced relocation. All of them carried a grief so profound it had persisted beyond death. "Ignorance isn't absolution," Chen said. "The mountain remembers every violation, every piece of earth turned without permission. The spirits have been patient for decades, but patience has its limits." The trees resumed their advance, and I could feel their combined will pressing against my mind like a physical force. They were offering me a choice, but it wasn't really a choice at all. Serve willingly or serve as a skeleton. Then I remembered something from my research into Cherokee history. "You're not just angry about the burial grounds," I said, the realization hitting me like cold wind. "You're angry about the removal, about being forced to leave this mountain when the government wanted your land." The trees stopped again. The ancestor spirits turned toward me with expressions of surprise. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, I continued. Your people were forced off this mountain and marched to Oklahoma. Thousands died on the Trail of Tears. The burial grounds were just the final insult. Not even your dead were allowed to rest in peace here. Chen's black eyes widened slightly. You know our history. It's part of my job to know the history of the land I protect. And you're right to be angry. What happened to your people was genocide. What the logging company did to your burial grounds was desecration. But I'm not your enemy. The humming from the trees changed pitch, becoming less threatening and more questioning. I'm a ranger, I said, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at me to run. My job is to protect this mountain and everything on it. That includes Cherokee sacred sites, whether they're marked on the maps or not. The ancestor spirits began to communicate among themselves in rapid Cherokee, their voices like wind through dry leaves. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was argumentative, some angry, others thoughtful. What are you proposing? Chen asked. Partnership. Help me survive this, and I'll work with the Cherokee Nation to have the burial grounds officially recognized and protected. No more development, no more logging, no more weather stations or hiking trails through sacred areas. And how do we trust a government representative? Your people have broken every promise they ever made to ours. It was a fair question. The federal government's record with Native Americans was an unbroken chain of betrayals and broken treaties. Because I'm not asking you to trust the government, I said. I'm asking you to trust me, Samuel Ironside, father of 2 daughters, whose word is his bond. I give you my personal guarantee that I will spend the rest of my career protecting this mountain. The trees began to hum again, but this time the sound was almost melodic. The ancestor spirits gathered in a circle, their debate growing more intense. I could see gestures and expressions that suggested deep disagreement about whether to trust me. Chen approached, his black eyes studying me carefully. They're discussing whether you're sincere or just trying to save your own life. Both, I admitted. I want to live, but I also want to do the right thing. Those burial grounds should have been protected from the beginning. And if the Forest Service overrules you, if the government decides the weather station is more important than Cherokee graves, I thought about my daughters, about the world I wanted to leave them, about the responsibility that came with wearing a ranger's badge. Then I'll resign and work with the Cherokee Nation directly. This mountain has guardians now, whether the government recognizes it or not. Better to have them as allies than enemies. The ancestor spirits reached some kind of consensus. The eldest, a woman whose face bore the proud bearing of a clan mother, approached until she was close enough to touch. Her hand passed through my chest, and for a moment I felt the full weight of her people's history, the beauty of their connection to this mountain, the horror of their forced removal, the rage of seeing their sacred places destroyed. But I also felt hope, the possibility that the cycle of desecration might finally end. She spoke a single word in Cherokee, then stepped back to rejoin the other spirits. Wado, Chen translated. Thank you. The animated trees began to withdraw, their bark faces losing the expressions of fury and returning to simple wood patterns. The humming faded to a gentle whisper, and the oppressive weight of their attention lifted from my shoulders. You'll remember this, Chen said, but you won't be able to prove it happened. The spirits are returning this section of Mount Mitchell to normal space and time. Your radio will work again. Your GPS will show the correct coordinates. but the weather data from the past 3 days will show only normal winter storm conditions. What about you? And Martinez and Hayes? Chen looked toward the dead Fraser fir where Dr. Martinez was still embedded in the trunk. As I watched, the bark began to release her, and she slumped to the ground unconscious but breathing. The skeleton of Dr. Hayes simply fell apart, his bones scattering naturally, as death should have claimed him days ago. I chose to stay connected to the spirit network, Chen said. Someone needs to serve as a liaison between worlds. I'll watch over the burial grounds and make sure they're never disturbed again. The black faded from his eyes, returning them to normal brown. But I could see something else there now, an ancient wisdom that hadn't been there before. What do I tell the Forest Service? Equipment failure due to severe weather. 2 casualties from exposure. 1 scientist chose to remain on the mountain for extended research. It's all technically true. The ancestor spirits were fading now, becoming translucent again as the connection between worlds weakened. But before they disappeared entirely, the clan mother spoke one more time. Chen translated. She says the mountain will know if you keep your promise, and if you don't, the trees will remember. I carried Dr. Martinez down Mount Mitchell on an improvised stretcher, my radio working perfectly now and my GPS showing normal coordinates. The rescue team met us at the parking area, and Martinez was unconscious with severe hypothermia, but alive. The official report stated that Dr. Hayes died from exposure and that Dr. Chen chose to remain on the mountain for extended cold weather research. All technically true, as Chen had said. Dr. Martinez recovered fully, though she claimed no memory of the 3 days on the mountain beyond falling asleep in the weather station and waking up in the medical tent. The Forest Service attributed her memory loss to hypothermia-induced confusion. She never returned to Mount Mitchell, transferring to a weather station in Arizona within the month. The weather data from our equipment showed exactly what Chen predicted. Normal winter storm conditions with no supernatural temperature spikes or impossible wind patterns. The investigation concluded that equipment malfunction combined with severe weather had led to confusion and tragedy. Case closed. But I kept my promise. It took 6 months of careful research and delicate negotiations, but I managed to connect with the eastern band of Cherokee Indians and share the location of the burial grounds. I couldn't tell them about the spirits or the walking trees. They would have thought I'd suffered altitude sickness and hallucinations. Instead, I presented it as a routine archaeological survey that had uncovered unmarked graves. The Cherokee Nation worked with the Forest Service to have the entire summit area declared a cultural preservation zone. No development, no logging, no weather stations. The official designation cited sensitive archaeological sites requiring protection under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. I was promoted to senior ranger and given oversight of the cultural preservation program. Tom Crawford thought it was appropriate recognition for my dedication to protecting the mountain after losing a colleague there. He never questioned my sudden expertise in Cherokee history or my insistence on hiring Cherokee consultants for all mountain activities. The Fraser fir die-off continued to spread across the Blue Ridge Mountains, creating vast forests of silver skeletons that tourists found hauntingly beautiful. Environmental scientists blamed the adelgid infestation and climate change. I knew better, but kept that knowledge to myself. Sometimes when I led educational tours through the lower elevations of Mount Mitchell, I would point out the dead trees and explain their ecological importance. Even in death, they continue to serve the mountain. I would tell groups of school children, they protect what's sacred and remember what should not be forgotten. The children would nod solemnly, not understanding the deeper truth in my words. Dr. Chen was occasionally spotted by hikers in the summit area, a solitary figure in winter clothing who would wave from a distance but never approach. When asked about him, I would explain that he was conducting long-term climate research and preferred not to be disturbed. The Forest Service assumed he was operating under some kind of special permit that wasn't their concern. I visited him once, hiking up to the burial grounds on the anniversary of our first encounter. He looked exactly the same as the day I left him there, unaged by a year of mountain weather. The Cherokee spirits were invisible now, but I could feel their presence in the way the dead trees swayed without wind. "Any regrets?" I asked. Chen smiled, and for a moment his eyes showed that ancient depth again. "None. This is where I belong now. The spirits need someone who understands both worlds, the scientific and the sacred. And the burial grounds are safe? Safer than they've been in a century. The mountain watches over itself now." I left him there and hiked, back down, knowing I would probably never see him again. But I also knew the mountain was in good hands, or whatever passed for hands among animated trees and ancient spirits. My daughters are 16 now, and they think their father is obsessed with mountain conservation. They're not wrong. I've spent 8 years ensuring that every square foot of Mount Mitchell is protected from development, that every Cherokee sacred site is properly marked and preserved, that no weather station or hiking trail disturbs what should remain undisturbed. Emma wants to be a park ranger like her father. Lucy prefers archaeology. Both of them have grown up hearing stories about respecting the land and understanding its history. They don't know the full truth about what happened to me on Mount Mitchell, but they understand that some places are sacred for reasons that go beyond science. The official Forest Service records show that the weather station incident resulted in improved safety protocols and cultural sensitivity training. What they don't show is that Mount Mitchell has been removed from the list of potential sites for new development projects. Every proposal that crosses my desk gets quietly filed under environmental concerns or cultural restrictions. Some places are protected by laws and regulations. Others are protected by forces that exist outside human understanding. Mount Mitchell is fortunate to have both. But the Fraser fir die-off continues to spread, and I sometimes wonder if other mountains are awakening their own guardians. There have been reports from the Great Smoky Mountains of hikers becoming disoriented in areas with extensive tree mortality. Strange sounds in the forests of Virginia. Equipment failures in West Virginia at sites where mining companies have been too aggressive with their excavations. Maybe the spirits on Mount Mitchell were just the beginning. Last month, I received a letter from a ranger in Colorado asking about protocols for investigating missing persons in areas with extensive beetle-kill tree mortality. The letter mentioned unusual acoustic phenomena and GPS anomalies that reminded me strongly of my own experience. I wrote back with careful advice about respecting indigenous cultural sites and consulting with tribal authorities before conducting operations in sensitive areas. I also included my personal phone number and a note that said, "If you encounter anything that can't be explained by standard Forest Service protocols, call me immediately." Because I learned something on Mount Mitchell that every ranger should know. The land remembers everything, and some places will defend themselves when pushed too far. Our job isn't just to protect people from the wilderness. Sometimes it's to protect the wilderness from people. The trees remember, the spirits endure, and some promises, once made, bind you to service that extends far beyond your official duties. My name is Samuel Ironside, and I've been keeping watch over Mount Mitchell for 8 years now. If you're reading this, It means something has happened to me, and the responsibility has passed to someone else. Keep your promises, respect the sacred places, and remember, dead trees can walk when they need to. The mountain is counting on you.